Hi guys. Tonight we slip quietly into a winter landscape that feels as though the entire world has gone still, caught in a breath that will not end. You feel the frozen ground beneath your boots, every step crunching with a sound sharp enough to make you glance behind your shoulder. The sky is a pale, bruised grey, and snowdrifts swirl like restless spirits. You probably won't survive this, at least not without a good cloak, a bit of luck, and maybe a flask of something stronger than water. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching right now, post your location and your local time in the comments. It always fascinates me where you're listening from across the world. Now, dim the lights. The march begins long before you ever get the chance to close your eyes. You trudge forward through the bitter winds of some forgotten plain, the army stretched out in a line of weary shadows. Each soldier carries not only weapons and armor, but also the gnawing thought of how, if at all, they will sleep once the march ends. The cold is not just an inconvenience, it seeps into bone, a quiet assassin that never announces itself with sword or trumpet. You taste iron in the air, as if frost has stolen every trace of warmth from the sky. The reality of moving an army in winter is brutal. Chroniclers of medieval campaigns often wrote more about the weather than about battles themselves. You know, for example, that in the winter of 1241, when the Mongols invaded Europe, entire villages froze in silence before armies even reached them. And yet, soldiers kept moving forward, step after relentless step, because to stop meant death from the elements just as surely as from the enemy. Historians still argue whether soldiers on such campaigns feared hunger or frost more. Both had reputations of cutting down more men than swords ever did. The soundscape of this march is strange. The clinking of armor grows muffled by snow, while horses snort, their breath billowing into ghostly plumes. Somewhere, a cart creaks beneath its load, the wood groaning like an old man's back, and under it all, your own heart pounds, keeping rhythm with the crunch of boots against hard-packed snow. The silence between steps is more unnerving than the sounds themselves, a reminder that snow swallows echoes whole. Every soldier has tricks for coping. Some wrap rags around their feet, not because it truly keeps the cold away, but because it gives the illusion of trying. Others stuff straw into their boots, something you might laugh at. Yet the practice is old and oddly effective, creating a buffer between skin and leather. A quirky tidbit? There are records of soldiers even slipping dried moss into their shoes, as though walking on a forest floor might fool the winter into sparing them. You carry your bedroll, though calling it that is generous. More often it is just a bundle of cloth, wool if you're lucky, linen if you're not. As the march stretches on, the weight digs into your shoulders, and you find yourself wondering whether the promise of sleep is worth the effort of lugging it. And yet, you know that when the march ends, when the camp is finally pitched on some frozen meadow, you'll be grateful for every thread of it. The wind has a way of talking, though not kindly. It whispers into your ears, shrieking when it finds a gap in your cloak, probing fingers of chill pressing down your collar, wrapping icy hands around your ribs. In such a moment, you realize that winter is not just a season. It is an enemy, patient, merciless, and never truly defeated. The ground itself resists you. Beneath the thin dusting of snow is frozen mud, uneven and cruel on tired feet. Horses stumble, carts sink, and men curse under their breath. A mainstream fact to keep in mind here: medieval armies did not often campaign in deep winter because logistics were nearly impossible. Roads froze, rivers swelled or iced over, and food became scarce. But when war demanded it, men were sent anyway, trudging toward destinations where battles would be fought not just against other humans, but against nature itself. The smell of the march is peculiar, part sweat, part damp wool, part smoke from the fires of villages past. Every now and then, you catch the sharper tang of horse dung steaming in the cold, a reminder that armies are living, moving ecosystems. The air freezes those smells quickly, holding them close like old memories that won't drift away. You glance at your companions, their faces red with windburn, brows heavy with ice forming in their lashes. Someone mutters a prayer, another hums a tune under his breath, each trying in their own way to forget the endless white road ahead. The quiet stretches too long, and you suddenly find yourself missing even the sound of crows. And yet, there is an odd beauty here. Moonlight glitters on fields of frost, stars glint cold and sharp above, and your boots leave patterns on the snow that feel almost ceremonial. It is in these moments that soldiers look up, forget the weight of their gear, and remember that even war must bow to the grandeur of winter's stillness. But remember, you are only at the beginning. Ahead lies not just the question of how you march, but how you rest, if you can call it rest. For the march always ends in camp, and camp always ends in night. And when the night is colder than any blade, the question of how you will sleep becomes the true test of endurance. When at last the march halts, you feel a strange relief and dread in equal measure. Your legs ache, your breath comes in clouds, and yet you know the hardest trial has only just begun. Where will you sleep tonight, in this landscape that seems actively hostile to the idea of comfort? Men scatter across the chosen ground like restless crows, each searching for a corner of shelter, any shape or shadow that might hold back the wind. Shelters, in truth, are more suggestion than reality. A medieval army rarely carried neat rows of tents like you might imagine from later centuries. Tents existed, of course, canvas pavilions for lords, captains, or those who could afford them. For the rank and file, shelter meant improvisation. Some men lash poles together, drape them with thin canvas, and create something closer to a child's fort than a dwelling. Others gather branches and brushwood, leaning them against rocks to form crude lean-tos. And if fortune smiles, perhaps a hollow or cave lies nearby, a natural shield from the night air. You crouch beneath one such contraption, ducking under the sagging fabric, and noticing how the wind seeps in from every gap. A cold draft brushes against your face, reminding you that the structure protects you less from chill and more from the snow itself. Historians still debate whether armies in winter prioritized sheltering men or horses first. Some chronicles describe officers ordering that animals be corralled into barns or huts, leaving men outside in makeshift canvas rows. Others insist soldiers always found a way to slip inside once the beasts had warmed the air. The feeling underfoot is no less bleak. Frozen soil offers no kindness to knees or backs. A mainstream fact, medieval chroniclers from the 100 Years' War often describe soldiers digging shallow pits in the frozen earth, laying timber across them, then layering straw to make a sort of half-buried shelter. It sounds clever, and it was, but when the ground was like iron, digging was nearly impossible. So, more often, men simply scraped snow into walls, hoping the barrier might block at least some of the wind. The sound of construction fills the camp, branches snapping, poles clattering, curses muttered as canvas slips loose. Somewhere nearby, a hammer beats against iron pegs that refuse to pierce frozen ground. A quirky detail floats through the record of a Burgundian campaign. Soldiers were known to soften tent ropes by urinating on them, believing it made the fibers more pliable against frost. Practical, if unpleasant. You wrinkle your nose at the thought. The smell here is a mixture of damp earth and resin from pine boughs stripped for makeshift walls. Smoke curls from a few premature fires, the scent of pitch rising like dark incense. Yet you know fires must be carefully hidden, for their glow carries far across snow, a beacon for raiders or watchful scouts. So the shelters themselves become not only a defense against weather, but against the temptation to blaze too brightly. You crawl deeper into the little space you've claimed, tugging your cloak close, pressing knees against chest. The walls rustle in the wind like sails on a stormy sea. Above you, snowflakes collect on the sagging canvas, forming tiny white constellations that threaten to collapse with a careless touch. And in this fragile cocoon, you feel the strangeness of medieval life. Even in war, Men built houses of twigs and cloth, always between destruction and survival. Your companions laugh quietly, not because anything is truly funny, but because laughter keeps the cold at bay. Someone jokes about how noble lords are snug in their silk-lined pavilions, while common soldiers crouch under brush like foxes. You can almost hear the bitterness beneath the humor. It is not all misery, though. Sometimes luck provides abandoned villages, huts, or barns structures torn from their original owners, pressed into service by tired men. These offered true roofs, walls thick with wattle and daub, and perhaps even a hearthstone where a timid fire might glow. But tonight, no such fortune greets you. Only canvas, brushwood, and the unrelenting sky. Historians often disagree about how effective these shelters truly were. Some argue that even the flimsiest roof gave psychological comfort, a sense of being hidden from the infinite, icy heavens. Others insist that such structures were little more than symbolic, barely warmer than sleeping in the open. As you curl into your corner, shivering, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. And yet, in this fragile hut, life stirs. You hear quiet humming from a comrade, the shuffle of boots outside, the groan of a horse tied too near. The world beyond the walls has teeth, but within this shabby shelter, there is at least the illusion of control. You close your eyes, wondering how long until sleep overtakes you, or whether the cold will wake you again before dreams can find you. You sit hunched now, the walls of brushwood or canvas flapping around you like a poor imitation of safety, and you notice how every man's cloak becomes both armor and blanket. Wool cloaks, fur collars, and patched garments, the very fabric of survival, become the barrier between breath and frost. The layers are pulled tight, tucked into belts, wrapped around heads, and knotted under chins. It is one of those practical truths of medieval life. Cloth was as much a weapon against death as a sword could ever be. Chronicles from the Baltic campaigns of the Teutonic Knights speak plainly of this. They describe soldiers layering wool upon wool, cloaks stiff with frozen dew, cloaks that smelled of smoke because fire was the only dryer available. And yet, these garments did not always save men. The bitter cold found its way through seams, through the thin places worn by years of marching. What you feel now is not warmth, but the illusion of it, as though wool might convince your mind to ignore the ache in your fingertips. Cloaks heavy with wet snow sag on your shoulders, turning comfort into burden. Even fur coveted, expensive, often taken from foxes, rabbits, or even wolf hides, offered only fleeting protection when storms lingered for days. There's a small, curious detail tucked into accounts from the Burgundian Wars. Some soldiers slept with their cloaks spread under them rather than over, believing the fabric's thickness mattered more as insulation from the frozen ground. Others argued the opposite, that you should always keep the cloak above, to trap body heat. This quiet, practical disagreement mattered far more to them than any lofty debate in a university hall. Which way would you choose? Cloak below or cloak above, when every choice might shave hours off your life expectancy? The air inside your shelter smells of wool, damp, musty, a bit like wet sheep standing too long in the rain. It clings to your nose and tongue, a constant reminder that clothing is both salvation and prison. Imagine trying to breathe through layers that never fully dry cloth, that gathers sweat during the day and frost at night. The scent becomes part of your identity as a soldier, more defining than the coat of arms you bear. It is well recorded in royal inventories that men-at-arms were issued thick mantles of wool, often dyed in the colours of their lords. Yet peasants, pressed into service, rarely had the luxury of new cloth. They scavenged, stitched old rags together, lined their cloaks with straw if they could find it. The fabric of armies was patchwork, a tapestry of survival stitched by necessity rather than craft. Modern historians remain divided on how effective cloaks really were in protecting against the cold. Some argue they were surprisingly efficient, especially when layered with fur and linen. Others point out that soldiers in northern campaigns still perished in alarming numbers, suggesting that no amount of cloth could withstand long exposure to brutal winters. The truth, as always, may lie in between, Cloaks helped, but only when combined with fire, shelter, and the shared warmth of fellow soldiers. You lean back now, feeling the cloak pull around your shoulders, and notice how it scratches your skin. Wool is never soft in this century. It is coarse, prickly, full of tiny burrs that grind against your neck, and yet you cling to it, because even discomfort is better than death. The cloak becomes a second skin, a blanket by night, a coat by day, a symbol of endurance that soldiers carry proudly, even when threads fray. Some men whisper stories to make the cold more bearable. One tale mentions warriors in Eastern Europe soaking their cloaks in animal fat to make them more resistant to water. Whether this worked or simply made them smell like rancid kitchens is anyone's guess. But in the desperate calculus of survival, anything seemed worth trying. You shift in your makeshift bedding and think of noblemen, sleeping in pavilions lined with velvet. Yet even there, wool was present, tucked under silks and brocades, because even the wealthy knew that fur and wool were the backbone of winter defense. A silken canopy might flatter the eye, but it was the coarse weave of sheep's fleece that kept the body alive. The camp is quiet now, men wrapped in cloaks like cocoons, their silhouettes bulging under the fabric. Horses stamp, snow hisses as flakes settle, and you hear the occasional cough muffled by cloth pulled high over mouths. Cloaks rustle like restless wings every time a man turns in his sleep. You pull yours tighter, imagining yourself as part of a flock of birds huddled together for warmth. There is something strangely intimate about these garments. They bear your sweat, your breath, your exhaustion. They carry smoke from fires long extinguished, stains from meals long forgotten. A cloak is both shield and diary, written not in words but in smells and textures. When you fall asleep beneath it, you fall asleep inside your own history. And as the wind presses against the walls of your shelter, you realize that tonight, this strip of cloth is all that stands between you and silence eternal. Wool and fur may not feel heroic, but they are the true companions of soldiers, more constant than comrades, more reliable than any promise of victory. You tug the edges over your face, closing your eyes, knowing that dawn will come cold again and the cloak will have to serve one more day. You lie there, cloak pulled close, and notice how every soldier gravitates toward others as night deepens. The cold gnaws more viciously when you are alone, so men press together, bodies forming an awkward tangle of elbows, knees, and shivering shoulders. It feels undignified, perhaps, to curl against another man like livestock, yet in these brutal winters pride is stripped away. Warmth becomes a communal act, a silent agreement that survival matters more than distance. It is widely attested in chronicles of the Northern Crusades that ranks of men slept side by side, so tightly packed they could barely turn. The chroniclers describe rows of soldiers resembling sardines laid flat upon the earth, their collective breath rising like smoke from a great furnace. This is not camaraderie so much as necessity, human heat pooled together in the desperate hope of making it through until dawn. You feel the breath of your neighbor against your cheek, hot and damp in the frozen air. At first it seems invasive, too intimate, but soon you realize it adds another layer of insulation, another heartbeat reminding you that you are not alone in this wilderness. The rhythm of shared breathing lulls you, as if the group itself becomes one vast, shuddering organism. And yet, discomfort lingers. Armor clinks as men shift, swords press into ribs, boots jab into thighs. Someone snores loudly, breaking the fragile calm. Still, no one moves away, for moving means surrendering heat. Even irritation becomes secondary to survival. A curious little anecdote appears in a 15th century mercenary's memoir. He recalled tying himself to his comrades with belts to prevent rolling apart in the night. Bound together like a bundle of sticks, they shared warmth more effectively. It sounds almost absurd, yet you can imagine the logic better, the awkward tug of leather straps than the numb ache of solitary freezing. There is debate among modern historians about just how effective this practice of communal sleeping was. Some argue it made the difference between life and death, especially on marches across the Alps or Carpathians. Others counter that too much closeness spread disease, lice, fleas, coughs passed quickly from one body to the next. The truth may be both. Closeness saved men from frostbite but doomed them to fevers later. Which risk would you prefer? The slow burn of illness, or the immediate bite of cold? The air in this huddled mass is heavy with smell wool, sweat, damp leather, faint hints of smoke clinging to hair. It is not pleasant but oddly reassuring, proof of life in a landscape otherwise stripped bare of human presence. You close your eyes and let the stink wash over you like a blanket of familiarity. Even animals were pulled into this circle. Horses, when permitted, were led near to add their body heat. Dogs, camp followers by nature, curled against their masters' feet. There's a record from an English winter campaign where men half joked that their dogs slept warmer than they did, tucked into cloaks as if they were noble companions. In truth, such beasts were more than comfort. They were survival, every heartbeat of warmth worth treasuring. The silence outside amplifies every sound within. A cough, a whispered prayer, the faint rustle of someone adjusting a belt. Snow mutes the world, and so your small circle becomes the entire universe. You feel strangely safe, not because the cold is defeated, but because the bodies around you remind you of your shared struggle. Imagine now the moonlight spilling over the camp. From above, soldiers must look like one vast creature, lumps and ridges of cloaks pressed together, all steaming faintly in the freezing air. The sight would unsettle an enemy scout. No fires, no voices, only mounds of sleeping men breathing as one. And yet, even as you drift, you sense fragility. If one man stirs, the whole row shifts. If one coughs too violently, the warmth breaks apart. It is a precarious alliance, this shared sleeping, always balancing between necessity and discomfort. The practice reminds you of something primal, like wolves curling together in dens, like birds pressing wing to wing. Soldiers discover that survival has always been about closeness. War strips men back to instincts older than steel, warmth, breath, and the steady rhythm of another chest rising beside your own. Somewhere in this restless pile, a man hums a tune. It threads softly through the group, half song, half comfort, a reminder that even in frozen misery, there is space for fragments of humanity. You listen, eyelids heavy, as voices fade into silence. And when at last sleep comes, it is not the peaceful slumber of warm beds, but the shallow doze of men clinging together against the dark. Dreams are broken, bodies ache, and yet you endure, because in numbers you find a fragile warmth that no cloak alone could offer. By morning you will peel apart stiff and sore, embarrassed by the intimacy yet grateful for its necessity. For now, though, you are simply part of the huddle, one more body in the collective attempt to trick winter into sparing you. The night stretches on, and with it comes the endless question of fire. You know the lure well, just a spark, a flicker, and the promise of warmth rises before you like salvation. A campfire becomes not only heat for shivering bones, but also light against the suffocating dark, a circle where voices gather and fears soften. Yet you also know the danger, for the fire that comforts you could easily betray you. Military accounts from the wars in Flanders and the long 100 Years' War mention this dilemma over and over. Soldiers craved fire, but commanders feared its glow could be seen for miles across flat, snowy fields. An enemy scout might spot a single ember and send a raiding party in the dead of night. And so, many nights passed without flame, men lying in darkness, their breaths clouding and freezing, their hands clutched tight to their cloaks, as though gripping life itself. Picture yourself kneeling in the snow, fumbling with flint and steel. Each strike sends a small shower of sparks, and your heart leaps as though the sun itself has returned. The tinder smoulders, dried moss, shavings of wood, maybe scraps of old parchment filched from a village church. The tiniest flame blossoms, fragile, wavering, and you cradle it with both hands like a newborn child. It catches, grows, and suddenly the fire is alive, crackling, dancing, filling the shelter with flickering light. But then comes the fear. You glance at the entrance of your hut, half expecting the glint of enemy steel. Men debate in whispers. Keep it burning and risk being seen, or snuff it out and freeze together in silence? Chroniclers describe commanders pacing through camps, stamping out fires that grew too large, scolding soldiers for carelessness. And yet, many quietly allowed small, hidden embers to remain, reasoning that a half-warm army fought better than one frozen stiff. One odd, almost comical trick surfaces in a 15th century soldier's diary. Men dug pits in the ground, set fires within, and covered the flames with flat stones or turf, letting heat seep upward while smoke was muffled. These earth fires glowed invisibly, warming the air above them without betraying light. Clever if you didn't mind sleeping on what felt like a gently smouldering floor. Modern scholars remain divided over how widespread such hidden fires were. Some believe they were common survival tactics. Others argue the practice was rare, pointing out that digging into frozen soil by torchlight was hardly practical. The truth, as always, may lie in regional improvisation. Armies on open plains had fewer chances than those camped near forests with softer ground. The sound of fire is hypnotic, even here. Crackle, pop, hiss of wet wood, a rhythm older than language. You close your eyes and let it become your lullaby, each spark a reminder that life can still push against winter's grip. The smell fills your nose, sharp resin from pine, bitter smoke from damp logs, sometimes even the faint sweetness of peat. In a world of foul odors, sweat, wet wool, horse dung smoke almost feels like perfume. Still, fire changes everything. Men loosen their cloaks, stretch hands toward the glow, and voices rise. Someone tells a joke, another mutters a story of home, and suddenly the camp feels less like a frozen graveyard and more like a gathering of humans again. The firelight softens hard faces, turns eyes into embers themselves. For a few stolen minutes, war feels far away. And yet, fire is greedy. It devours fuel, forcing soldiers to scavenge, constantly splitting frozen branches, tearing apart fences, even ripping beams from abandoned huts. You might laugh grimly at the irony, burning the homes of peasants to stay alive long enough to keep fighting. Survival never asks permission. The fire dies quickly if left alone, so you feed it, coax it, nurse it like a fragile child. And when at last it dwindles to embers, glowing red under a skin of ash, you tuck yourself closer, trying to capture the last of its heat. Many soldiers admitted in their letters that they fell asleep watching embers fade, whispering prayers that the warmth would outlast the night. A curious superstition lingers in some accounts. Men believed it was bad luck to let a fire die completely, as though extinguishing flame meant inviting death into the camp. So even if smoke alone remained, they would stir it, blow gently, keeping at least one glowing coal alive until morning. You can almost feel yourself crouching there, cheeks chilled, eyes watering from smoke, insisting on life through a glowing speck of red. From the outside, the camp looks spectral. A faint haze of smoke drifts upward, barely visible against the moonlight. The rest is silence, interrupted only by the occasional snap of wood. An enemy scout might miss it entirely or might not. That is the gamble every soldier makes. And so you lie down, cloak pulled close, body warmed by the faint exhalations of a fire hidden in its pit. You dream of home, of hearths burning bright, of kitchens thick with wood smoke and laughter. Then you wake again, reminded that here, on the frozen front, even a single spark is both friend and traitor. When the glow of fire fades and the camp grows still, you stretch out upon the ground itself and feel its hostility. The frozen earth offers no comfort, so soldiers learn to cheat it with whatever scraps they can find. Straw becomes the most precious material of all. Not grain, not bread, but the dry stalks left after harvest, the poor man's mattress, the soldier's insulation. You picture yourself scattering straw in a shallow pile, listening to its brittle crunch as you shift, the sound echoing in the silence of the night. Chronicles from campaigns in France and Bohemia often mention carts of straw being seized, not for fodder, but for bedding. The logic was simple. A layer between body and ground made all the difference. It was well understood, even in the Middle Ages, that contact with frozen soil sapped warmth faster than icy air alone. So armies scoured villages, ripping straw from barns, lofts, even rooftops thatched with bundles. The golden stalks became more valuable in those moments than any silver coin. Imagine the smell, a mixture of dust, hay, and faint sweetness that lingers from harvest months past. When pressed against the nose of a soldier, it brings memories of autumn fields, of quiet farms now long abandoned. Straw was not just insulation, it was nostalgia, a whisper of peacetime tucked beneath weary bones. Yet straw was not always available. In forests, soldiers gathered pine needles, moss, or dried leaves. In marshy lands, reeds or rushes served instead, though dampness often defeated their purpose. One peculiar account from a Burgundian company tells of soldiers using bundles of dried nettles, their sting long since gone, to soften their bedding. It worked until frost returned them to brittle spikes by morning. There is ongoing disagreement among medieval scholars about how armies transported such bedding. Some argue that commanders requisitioned entire wagons filled with straw, distributing it like rations. Others claim men were expected to scavenge on their own, competing with comrades for handfuls of stalks. Perhaps both are true, depending on wealth and command. Either way, you can sense the scramble, the desperation to find something, anything that would break the icy kiss of the ground. You spread your bedroll across the straw. It is little more than a coarse sack, stitched from linen or hemp, sometimes filled with feathers if fortune allowed. But most often, it is empty cloth, a skin to hold whatever the earth might give. Tonight it holds straw, but on other nights, perhaps reeds, moss, or nothing at all. The roll crinkles beneath you, sharp stalks poking through, scratching your legs even as they save you from the chill. Listen closely, and you hear the camp settling the same way. Men shuffle, mutter curses as straw stabs into thighs, adjust cloaks until the rustling dies into stillness. Horses stamp on piles laid beneath them, their heavy hooves crushing stalks into soft mats. The smell of hay drifts through the air, mingling with smoke and sweat, creating an odd perfume of war and farmstead. One detail often overlooked: straw draws vermin. Fleas, lice, even rats nest in the warmth. It is not uncommon to wake in the night, scratching furiously, cursing the creatures that found your bedding as inviting as you did. Yet soldiers accepted this bargain. Better itchy skin than frostbitten flesh. There's a fascinating little note in a French chronicle about the Battle of Nancy in 1477. Some men reportedly laid their shields flat, piling straw atop them, using the metal as a barrier against damp earth. The shields rattled and shifted beneath their weight, but the combination created a bed as clever as it was absurd. Picture yourself lying on steel, softened only by stalks of hay, drifting between discomfort and survival. The practice of carrying straw became so important that in some contracts, mercenaries were promised not only wages and rations but also bedding supplies. That detail tells you everything. Commanders knew men would desert faster if left to freeze each night. Even pay mattered less than the chance of a dry night's rest. You roll over now, the straw shifting under your weight, prickling at your skin through thin cloth. It is imperfect, scratchy, and sometimes damp, but it is also life. A cushion against the hard cruelty of the ground, a fragile reminder that even in war, men craved softness. From above, the camp resembles a field of haystacks, cloaks bulging over mounds of straw, bodies curled tightly. Snow gathers on the roofs of tents, frost bites at exposed noses, and yet beneath the straw, soldiers cling to warmth. It is humbling, in a way, to see that even the most hardened warrior sought comfort in the same material that lined the cribs of peasants' children. And as you close your eyes, straw cradling your back, you think of home again. You think of barns filled with golden light, of beds stuffed with feathers, of fires that never threatened to betray your location. But here, on the frozen front, straw is enough. It whispers like autumn fields when you move, reminding you that life, though fragile, can be softened by the simplest gifts of the earth. You have only just begun to drift into that shallow, half-dreaming state when a rough hand shakes your shoulder. It is your turn to rise. The night is not only for sleeping, it is also for watching. Every camp, whether noble army or ragtag band of conscripts, must maintain a constant rotation of guards. Sleep is never whole. It comes in fragments, broken by the weight of responsibility, and you feel that heaviness now as you drag yourself upright. The concept of watch rotations is well attested in military manuals of the late Middle Ages. Every company divided the night into shifts, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. Men were chosen in groups, assigned to keep their eyes open while the rest tried to rest. You picture the roll being called out by a captain, the reluctant groans that follow, the men who pray their names might be skipped, but no one escapes. To leave the camp unwatched was to invite disaster, ambush, theft, or fire in the night. You fumble for your cloak, still damp with frost, and stumble outside into the frozen air. The contrast strikes you immediately. Inside the shelter, there had been the warmth of breath and straw, however small. Outside, the wind slices through you like a whetted blade. Your teeth chatter before you even reach the appointed post. There is a strange rhythm to this duty. You pace slowly along the camp's edge, boots crunching in the snow, the faint glow of hidden fires at your back. Beyond lies only darkness, fields glimmering faintly under moonlight, forests looming like frozen waves. Every shadow feels alive. Was that movement a scout, a wolf, or only drifting snow? Your imagination grows sharper in the cold, inventing dangers where silence reigns. And yet, real threats were never far. Chronicles of the Hussite Wars describe sudden raids launched precisely at night, when men were most vulnerable. Raiders would dash into camps, slashing ropes, scattering shelters, setting straw ablaze. The night watch existed to buy precious moments enough for comrades to seize weapons before chaos consumed them. It is recorded that sentries carried horns, bells, or simply their voices, ready to rouse the camp at the first hint of trouble. The image is easy to conjure, a single blast of a horn tearing through the quiet, shouts erupting as half-asleep men tumble from their straw beds, swords clattering, armor hastily strapped over nightclothes. That shrill sound could mean the difference between survival and slaughter. But the hardest part of watch duty is not vigilance, it is staying awake. You feel your eyelids heavy, your body pleading to lie down again. Men devised all manner of tricks, pacing in circles, striking themselves lightly, even singing under their breath to keep the mind alert. A curious anecdote survives from a Flemish company. Some men chewed on leather straps, claiming the constant motion of the jaw kept them conscious. It may sound ridiculous, but desperate measures were needed when frost and fatigue combined. There is ongoing debate among historians about the punishment for sleeping on duty. Some accounts speak of harsh executions, even hanging, while others suggest lighter reprimands were more common. The truth likely depended on circumstance. In a fortress under siege, where a single lapse could doom hundreds, discipline was brutal. On the march, commanders may have turned a blind eye, recognizing that exhaustion made perfection impossible. Still, the fear of being caught asleep haunted every sentry. The camp around you snores and shifts. You hear muffled coughs, the occasional restless groan, the creak of leather straps as someone rolls over. It feels unfair that they may rest while you pace, but you remind yourself that they too will take their turn, perhaps when you are lucky enough to sink deeper into dreams. Watch duty is the great equalizer. No man, high or low, is fully exempt. The smells of the night are sharper here. Cold carries scents differently. Smoke seems harsher, manure more pungent, pine resin clearer. You breathe deeply, forcing yourself to memorize the landscape with your senses. If the wind changes, if a new odor drifts in burning pitch, horses unfamiliar to your camp, you will know danger approaches. In this way, smell itself becomes a weapon. You glance upward and notice the stars. Brilliant, cold, scattered like shards of glass. They are the only companions who never sleep. Medieval soldiers often relied on them for orientation, marking constellations that told them which direction raids might come from. A few whispered that certain stars were omens, that their brightness foretold victory or doom. You imagine yourself staring too long, trying to read the future in icy light. After what feels like eternity, another soldier trudges toward you, shoulders hunched, face pinched with fatigue. Your relief has arrived. You hand over your place, mutter a few words of warning. All quiet, but watch the trees, and retreat back toward your straw bedding. Your limbs ache, your eyes burn, but you feel a flicker of pride. You have kept the night safe for a few short hours. Back inside, you slip once more into the pile of bodies, cloak wrapped tight. The warmth is immediate, almost overwhelming after the icy patrol. You breathe deep, letting the heat of your comrades seep into you, and for a moment, you think you might sleep like the dead. But you know the truth. In a few hours, someone else will tug your arm again. Sleep on campaign is never whole. It is stolen, fractured, and always haunted by the knowledge that vigilance must never end. You have barely surrendered to exhaustion when the rhythm of marching feet returns in your memory, and suddenly the idea of where to lie becomes strange again. Sometimes the earth itself refuses to host you. Roads turn to glass, rivers seize solid, and you find yourself facing a terrible choice: press on across sheets of ice, or collapse upon them, hoping fatigue will outweigh discomfort. Imagine the shock of lying down on a frozen river, its surface groaning faintly beneath your weight, the black water whispering just below. It is no romantic invention. Chroniclers of the Teutonic Knights in their Baltic campaigns describe soldiers forced to rest on ice, when river crossings failed, and no dry land lay within reach. The winter of 1242, the same season that saw the famous clash on Lake Peipus between the Teutonic Order and Novgorod's Alexander Nevsky, carried accounts of warriors spending hours sprawled on frozen lakesides. They had marched all day through snowdrifts, only to be denied firewood or straw. Ice became mattress, blanket, and coffin all at once. Your senses rebel at the thought. The chill seeps instantly into your bones. You shift from side to side, but each movement presses new skin against the unforgiving cold. You imagine the crackle of frost forming on your beard, the sound of mail stiffening like frozen rope. Every breath drifts across the surface of the river, curling into mist that vanishes in an instant. One unusual observation appears in a Danish manuscript. Soldiers sometimes spread their cloaks across shields laid on the ice, hoping to create a layer of air beneath them. It worked, just enough to dull the bite. Others rolled brushwood or reeds into mats, then laid them on the frozen surface, a trick borrowed from peasants who fished in winter. The ingenuity is touching, though the results were meager. Specialists today disagree on just how often entire companies were forced to bed on ice. Some argue it was a rare, desperate measure noted precisely because it shocked chroniclers. Others suggest it happened frequently in northern Europe, where rivers were so numerous that a campaign without ice sleeping was unlikely. Perhaps both positions hold truth, depending on geography and fortune. The sounds of such a camp were peculiar, not the muffled thud of boots on earth, but the eerie ringing of iron on ice. Horses slipped and snorted, their hooves sliding helplessly. Men cursed loudly, their words echoing across the empty surface, bouncing back like ghosts mocking them. If you tried to sleep, every shuffle of your companions sent tremors through the frozen sheet, a reminder that below lay water waiting to claim you. And yet fatigue conquers even fear. Picture yourself wrapping your cloak tight, curling into a ball, and letting the numbness become part of you. Your breath fogs against the ice, forming tiny patterns of frost, as if you are painting your presence onto the river itself. The surface creaks, but you tell yourself it has held armies before. It will hold you tonight. The smell of such a place is sharp and clean, the scent of frozen water carrying none of the earthiness of soil. It is almost sterile, save for the faint tang of iron from weapons and the sour breath of men lying too close. It is a smell that feels both pure and hostile, like breathing in nothing at all. You shift again, trying to trick your body into forgetting. Some men place saddles beneath their heads, a ridiculous attempt at comfort, but perhaps the familiar shape helps. Others lie flat, arms crossed over chests, mimicking the posture of effigies carved on church tombs. Sleep and death become hard to distinguish on such nights. There is a peculiar superstition whispered in chronicles. Some soldiers believed that sleeping directly on ice drew spirits from beneath the water, ghosts of drowned men who would sap your warmth. To protect against this, they carved crosses into the ice before lying down, as though holy marks could convince the river to behave. Whether you believe it or not, you picture yourself tracing a shaky symbol in frost before lowering your body onto the surface. From above, the image would be haunting. Rows of men sprawled like dark stains across a glittering white sheet, their shapes lit by a pitiless moon. No fires, no straw, only cloaks wrapped tight. Every figure a stark reminder of how war reduces men to creatures clinging to survival. And when sleep finally arrives, it is a shallow surrender, constantly broken by the fear of cracking beneath you. Dreams are short, full of water, drowning, and sudden jolts awake. You feel your limbs stiffen, your fingers claw at air, and only the rhythm of your neighbor's breath convinces you that you remain among the living. Dawn comes brutally bright. You rise slowly, joints aching as though ice itself has claimed them. The river groans beneath your departing steps, and you leave behind nothing but faint depressions where bodies had lain. Yet the memory clings. You slept on a river, trusting a thin sheet of frozen water to hold the weight of your life. When dawn fades and another march ends, you realize that warmth is not the only thing soldiers must endure. The next trial comes from your very clothing, the wool and linen you thought of as allies. Once wet, they never quite dry. Picture yourself crawling into your shelter, cloak heavy on your shoulders, boots soaked, and tunic clinging damply to your chest. By nightfall, the air inside your shelter smells sour, a mixture of sweat sealed into wool and the sharp tang of mildew. This is no exaggeration. Sources from the Burgundian campaigns and the sieges of the Baltic front record complaints of damp raiment being as cruel as hunger. Dampness gnawed at soldiers, weakening them with chills and coughs, making sleep restless. You tug the fabric close and wince at its odor, a smell that is both familiar and unbearable, like sheep's wool forgotten in rain, like smoke woven permanently into every thread. It is one of those undeniable facts. Medieval cloth, especially wool, was hard to clean in winter campaigns. Once soaked, it held water like a sponge, and the body's warmth was never enough to drive it out. Imagine falling into slush during a march, then lying down hours later still wearing the same tunic, the wetness pressed against your ribs, your breath turning the fabric to clammy ice. To cope, men improvised. Some sat close to fires before sleeping, turning slowly like meat on a spit, arms outstretched to dry each side. Others stripped garments and hung them from poles, though the risk of theft or sudden raids made many hesitate. A curious anecdote from a Swiss company tells of men stuffing their damp tunics with hot stones from the fire, as if turning them into crude, steaming ovens. Whether this dried cloth or simply scorched it, no one can say. There is scholarly disagreement over whether commanders provided spare clothing during prolonged campaigns. Some inventories list extra tunics or hose as part of a soldier's equipment. Others suggest that most common troops had to make do with what they wore at the start. Perhaps elite men-at-arms carried trunks of garments, while peasants wore the same threadbare outfit for months. Either way, the reality for most was clear. You slept in what you had, wet or dry, stinking or stiff with frost. The sensory world of these garments is overwhelming. Wool scratches the skin, especially when damp. The collar chafes your neck, stiff with salt from dried sweat. Your nose fills with the constant odor of smoke, because every evening's fire leaves a film on your cloak. And beneath it all is the sour, animal musk of wool itself, a smell that clings even when the garment is new. Imagine lying down surrounded by others, all wrapped in the same damp cloth. The tent becomes a chamber of odors, wet sheep, unwashed bodies, smoke, and mold mingling into one heavy perfume. You roll to one side, nose pressed against coarse wool, and feel your stomach twist at the stink. Yet strangely, that odor is also reassurance. It is proof of life, of comrades breathing, of soldiers enduring the same discomfort beside you. One marginal note in a French manuscript hints at an unusual solution. Some soldiers sprinkled strong vinegar onto their garments, believing it masked the smell and warded off illness. Others rubbed cloaks with herbs like thyme or sage if they had access, filling the air with sharp, medicinal scents. It is easy to picture a weary man clutching a sprig of thyme, tucking it into his tunic as though it were both charm and deodorant. But nothing fully conquered the damp. Even nobles with finer cloth suffered. Silken linings clung cold against their skin, fur collars matted with moisture, reeking of rot when kept too long near fires. War reduced everyone to the same state, shivering in garments that betrayed them, wishing only for the impossible luxury of dryness. The health consequences were obvious. Coughs spread rapidly in such conditions, and fevers followed. Soldiers scribbled in letters about comrades wheezing all night, their chests rattling like loose drums. Sleep became shallow, broken by hacking fits that spread from man to man. In some camps, the chorus of coughs was louder than the snores. And yet, there was endurance. Men grew accustomed to the stench, the damp, the scratch. They told themselves that if their clothes reeked, then so did the enemy's. Misery shared was easier to bear. A soldier might joke about his own smell, comparing himself to a drowned goat, and the laughter even tinged with bitterness made the odor a little less oppressive. As you drift on your straw bedding, cloak pressed over you, the musty smell fills your nostrils. At first it makes you gag, then gradually your senses dull. It becomes background, like the ever-present cold or the steady ache in your legs. You fall asleep, breathing wool and mildew, knowing you will wake to the same scent tomorrow and the day after, until either spring comes or your campaign ends. You lie there, wrapped in wool that never quite dries, and hear the wind scraping across the camp like invisible claws. Every sound is sharper in winter, the groan of a tree, the snap of ice, even the whisper of snow falling. Tonight, though, something else captures the men's attention. The way snow itself can serve as shelter. You might imagine snow as enemy, endless drifts that soak your boots and bury your path. Yet for a desperate soldier, snow becomes both bed and wall, a paradox of misery that offers protection. Contemporary accounts from northern Europe note that men sometimes dug shallow hollows into snowbanks, curling inside them like foxes in dens. The snow-muffled wind blocked sight and created a pocket where body heat lingered longer than in the open. Picture yourself scooping snow with stiff hands, carving a space just wide enough for your curled frame. You crawl inside, the walls pressing close, and suddenly the roaring wind outside dims to a distant hum. It is a strange comfort. The cold does not vanish, but it changes character. Instead of a biting, restless presence, it becomes a stillness, a heavy blanket of chill that presses but does not cut. Snow insulates, paradoxical as it sounds. You breathe into the hollow, your breath fogging against the white walls, dripping moisture down onto your face. The space feels both claustrophobic and oddly safe, a frozen womb holding you through the night. A curious note appears in a Livonian chronicle. Soldiers on campaign were observed deliberately piling snow against the sides of tents to strengthen them. The walls froze solid, turning flimsy canvas into fortresses of ice. It seems absurd, using the very enemy of comfort as protection, but in winter, irony often walks hand in hand with survival. Modern researchers remain divided on how common snow shelters truly were. Some argue that chronicles exaggerate, presenting them as rare oddities worth noting. Others suggest the practice was widespread, borrowed from local peasants who had long mastered the art of surviving northern winters. Perhaps the truth lies in improvisation. When snow was deep, soldiers used it. When forests provided timber, they did not bother. The sensory details of such a shelter are peculiar. Sound is muffled to near silence, as though the world itself has fallen asleep. Smell is minimal, save for your own damp wool and the faint sweetness of frozen air. Touch, however, dominates. Snow clings to your lashes, melts against your skin, numbs your fingers. You shift slightly, and flakes fall onto your neck, icy jolts that make you wince. Yet you stay, because outside, the wind cuts deeper. Imagine the view from above, a field dotted with strange mounds, men hidden inside like hibernating animals. The camp disappears into the landscape, indistinguishable from the drifts. An enemy scout might ride past, never realizing dozens of soldiers sleep just beneath the snow. The thought brings a small thrill, camouflage, born not of strategy, but of desperation. Of course, snow shelters bring their own dangers. Walls collapse, suffocating the sleeper. Moisture seeps into boots and gloves, freezing them solid by morning. One soldier recorded in the margins of a prayer book that his boots were so frozen he could not pull them on without first thawing them near a fire, an impossible luxury during a night march. He claimed to have spent an entire day walking barefoot on snow, his feet wrapped only in strips of cloth torn from his cloak. Some soldiers whispered that snow caves were dangerous because spirits roamed inside them. A superstition claimed that sleeping within snow attracted the souls of those buried by avalanches. To ward them off, men carved small crosses on the walls or muttered prayers before crawling inside. You can picture it clearly. A soldier hunched in the half-dark, scratching a shaky cross with his dagger into the icy wall, hoping that gesture alone would keep the night silent. And yet, for all their discomfort, snow shelters sometimes gave better rest than tents. The air within stayed still, and the muffling silence dulled the mind. You close your eyes, listening to nothing but your own breath, echoing faintly back at you. The snow becomes your blanket, heavy and indifferent, pressing you into stillness. For a few hours, you almost forget you are in an army at all. When morning comes, you crawl out of the hollow and are blinded by light. Snow sparkles painfully bright under the sun, and your body, stiff from crouching, protests with every movement. Still, you survived. The hollow behind you remains, a small scar in the white expanse, proof of the night's strange bargain. You slept in the arms of the very thing you feared, and it let you rise again. You crawl out of the snow hollow, stiff and aching, only to discover that the night's shelter is never truly yours alone. When the cold tightens its grip, creatures of every kind come seeking the same refuge. And among them, the most persistent companions of medieval soldiers are not wolves or owls, but the smallest and most loathed, vermin. You lie back on your straw, tugging your cloak close, and feel the faint scuttle of something against your ankle. At first, you convince yourself it is nothing, a trick of sensation from numb toes. But then it moves again, unmistakably real, whiskers brushing, tiny claws scratching. Rats, bold and hungry, crawl through bedding, as if they too were soldiers entitled to a warm place. The sound of their teeth gnawing at scraps echoes like tiny saws in the stillness of the camp. Chroniclers of sieges describe vermin swarming winter camps in horrifying detail. Rats, emboldened by hunger, nibbled food stores, chewed through leather, and sometimes even bit at sleeping men's fingers. You imagine jerking awake with a squeal, swatting blindly in the dark, only to feel the rat already darting away into straw. Worse still, fleas and lice nested in the very bedding meant to comfort you. Soldiers joked grimly that fleas were the true victors of war, always feeding, never defeated. The stench of vermin is unmistakable. a sour musk that blends with the odors of sweat and smoke. You wrinkle your nose, but you know you cannot drive them away entirely. Cats were rare luxuries in military camps, and even dogs preferred warmth near their masters to chasing pests. There is a peculiar anecdote from a German campaign. Some men smeared grease on their bedding, believing the slickness deterred fleas. Others sprinkled ash or crushed herbs, swearing it kept lice at bay. Whether these remedies worked or not, the scratching never stopped. One mercenary's letter mentions that he had named the largest rat in his tent Hans and claimed it followed him loyally for weeks. Half jest, half resignation when war drags on, even pests become companions of a sort. Specialists today disagree about the full extent of vermin infestation in winter quarters. Some argue that chroniclers exaggerated, using lice and rats as metaphors for moral decay. Others believe the problem was exactly as bad as described, perhaps worse, given the conditions of overcrowded shelters and damp straw. Either way, the evidence is vivid. Soldiers itched, scratched, and cursed their nightly bedfellows as fiercely as they cursed the cold. The sensation of vermin in your bedding is inescapable. You toss, trying to brush them away, but the scratching returns minutes later. The straw shifts, rustling as tiny bodies dart through it. Sleep becomes shallow, broken not only by shivers, but by the fear of what crawls over your skin. You scratch at your scalp, fingernails dragging across dried sweat and grit, wondering if it is your imagination or the real scuttle of lice. And yet, exhaustion conquers disgust. Men fell asleep scratching, only to wake covered in bites. The irritation was constant, but in comparison to frostbite or starvation, vermin were almost tolerable. You think to yourself, better to endure itching than the silence of death. The smell of the camp only grows worse as vermin multiply. Rat droppings mingle with the must of damp wool. Soldiers laugh bitterly, saying the rats were fatter than the men, feasting on stolen rations while warriors chewed stale bread. Some swore rats were spies of the enemy, slipping between camps at night to carry secrets on their twitching whiskers. It was jest, of course, but in the long nights of winter, superstition carried as much weight as fact. Despite the misery, vermin offered strange comforts. Their constant presence reminded soldiers they were not alone, even in the darkest nights. When silence pressed too heavily, the scratching of rats became proof of life nearby. A cruel, ironic companionship, but companionship nonetheless. You curl tighter into your cloak, ignoring the rustle at your feet. The night stretches long, and your body aches for sleep, no matter what shares the straw. Dreams come fitfully, broken by the sensation of crawling legs, yet you cling to them because anything is better than the cold, staring silence outside. And in the morning, you rise, scratching at your arms, muttering curses, knowing that tonight the vermin will return as faithfully as the frost. Morning creeps pale across the camp, and you notice something new among the cloaks and bedding, pieces of cloth that do not belong. Soldiers have always scavenged, and on winter front lines, captured gear is more than a trophy, it is survival. Blankets stripped from fallen foes, cloaks stolen in raids, even bedrolls dragged hastily from abandoned tents become prizes of warmth. The battlefield is as much a marketplace of stolen fabric as it is a contest of steel. Contemporary records from the 100 Years' War describe men rifling through enemy baggage after skirmishes, not just for coin or weapons, but for blankets. One chronicler notes almost casually that Burgundian soldiers covered themselves in the cloth of the slain, as if this practice required no further explanation. When the cold bit as fiercely as swords, a dead man's blanket was no less valuable than his armor. You can picture it. After battle, the air still heavy with smoke and cries, men kneel not to pray but to search. A soldier pulls at the cloak of a fallen enemy, shakes free the mud, and drapes it over his shoulders without hesitation. The fabric may still smell of another man's sweat, of blood and fear, but warmth has no allegiance. You close your eyes and imagine the unsettling weight of such cloth on your back, salvation wrapped in the memory of violence. One unusual note appears in the journal of an Italian mercenary. He wrote of wearing 3 cloaks at once, 2 taken from Frenchmen, 1 from a German ally who no longer needed it. The man admitted he looked like a walking bale of rags, yet he slept better that night than he had in weeks. It is a detail both grim and oddly comical. The vision of hardened warriors waddling under layers of ill-matched stolen cloth. Specialists disagree about how systematically such looting was encouraged. Some argue commanders turned a blind eye, recognizing that confiscated bedding kept men alive. Others point out that chroniclers often scolded these practices as dishonorable, lumping them together with the looting of churches or villages. Still, the evidence suggests necessity trumped morality. When frost claimed fingers and toes, no soldier cared about the heraldry sewn on a blanket. The sensory experience of stolen cloth is vivid. Imagine pulling a fur-lined cloak close, still faintly warm from its previous owner. The fur smells of smoke, and perhaps of dog, the wool beneath damp with sweat. It is not pleasant, but it is different, and sometimes difference itself feels like relief. You tug it tighter, ignoring the thought of whose body it once wrapped. Some soldiers told themselves stories to ease the guilt. They claimed that spoils carried the strength of the enemy, that to wear another man's cloak was to absorb his courage. Others whispered that taking such items invited the ghost of the slain to follow you, clinging to your shoulders until the cloth rotted away. To ward this off, charms were sewn into the fabric crosses, tiny saints' medallions, scraps of parchment with prayers inked upon them. You picture a soldier tracing a prayer onto a square of parchment by firelight, then tucking it into a seam of a stolen cloak, hoping it silenced whatever spirit might be attached. From a distance, a winter camp becomes a patchwork of stolen colours. Cloaks of French blue mix with English red, German grey, Italian green. No one looks uniform. Everyone looks like a mismatched tapestry stitched together by chance. Snowflakes cling to the fabric, muting the colours until all blur into white. The sound of these layers is constant rustling wool, scraping leather straps, the swish of fur brushing fur. At night, when men shift restlessly, the camp seems alive with the sigh of stolen cloth. You listen and realize you are surrounded not only by comrades, but by the remnants of every foe you have faced. It is one of those undeniable realities of medieval war. Survival often meant sleeping beneath the skin of the enemy. You feel the strange intimacy of it, as though war collapses all divisions in the end. French or English, knight or peasant, when death strips them down, their blankets become yours. And so you lie down that night with an unfamiliar cloak draped across you. It is heavy, smelling of smoke and sweat not your own. But as you curl beneath it, the weight soothes rather than disturbs. You sleep, knowing the warmth belongs no longer to the man who once bore it. In the front lines of winter, ownership ends with breath, and warmth passes on like inheritance, one soldier to another. You sink beneath the weight of stolen cloth, but warmth is not the only thing carried into sleep. The mind remains restless, and even as the body curls tight against the frost, the spirit wanders into darker places. Night on the front lines is a battleground of its own, one fought in dreams and half-waking terrors. You roll onto your side, eyes closed, only to feel the echoes of combat crashing down upon you again. Accounts from medieval campaigns often mention soldiers muttering in their sleep, crying out as though still locked in battle. Chroniclers of the Crusades in particular note how men, even in moments of supposed rest, struggled against invisible foes, swinging arms, flailing in straw, voices hoarse with nightmare. It is no surprise. The brain carries the day's violence into the night. You have seen comrades cleaved by swords, heard the screams of horses pierced by arrows, smelled the coppery tang of spilled blood. Such things do not simply vanish when you close your eyes. Imagine lying among dozens of men, the air heavy with damp wool, when suddenly one jolts upright, shouting. Another thrashes beside you, striking your arm with his elbow as he fights phantoms only he can see. Sleep never stays still. It breaks, collapses, reforms, always carrying the burden of memory. One curious tidbit appears in a soldier's letter from the Burgundian Wars. He described men dreaming so violently that their bedding tore apart, straw scattered as though a brawl had erupted in the night. He claimed that, by morning, their faces were streaked with tears, though none admitted to weeping. The letter ends with the line, "I fear the night more than the sword." You can almost hear the confession whispered into your own ear. Modern historians remain divided on the role of trauma in medieval soldiers' lives. Some argue that men were hardened by constant exposure, their minds dulled to horror by repetition. Others suggest that nightmares, terrors, and what we might call psychological scars were as real then as now, simply unspoken in cultures that prized stoicism. The disagreement lingers, but one thing feels certain as you shift uneasily on your straw. No mind emerges unmarked from nights spent recalling slaughter. The sensory landscape of these nightmares is vivid. You dream of screams that are not real, but your ears hear them. You smell fire, though no fire burns near you. Your skin prickles as if struck by arrows, though it is only straw poking through your bedroll. Dreams blur into reality, and waking does not always bring relief. Sometimes you wake gasping, convinced an enemy's blade is descending, only to find silence and the snores of comrades. Whispers pass through the camp about men who never seem to sleep peacefully again. One superstition claimed that spirits of the slain haunted their killers, tormenting them with nightly visions. To protect against this, soldiers pinned charms to their cloaks or recited prayers before lying down. You picture yourself whispering the same line over and over, "Deliver me from visions," as though words alone could bar the gates of dream. But the dreams still come. You dream of comrades' faces, twisted in agony, then turn to see them lying peacefully at your side. You dream of frozen rivers swallowing you whole, then wake to find only frost creeping along the edge of your shelter. You dream of arrows blotting the sky, then open your eyes to see only snowflakes drifting downward. The line between waking and sleeping grows fragile, thinner each night. A strange comfort arises in shared terror. When one man wakes screaming, others reach out, mutter reassurances, or even laugh gently to hide their own fears. There is a quiet solidarity in knowing you are not alone in being haunted. War strips dignity, but it also breeds empathy, shivering together, scratching lice, enduring nightmares side by side. And yet, the dreams remain relentless. Some nights they come softly, shadows whispering across your mind. Other nights they descend like armies, filling your skull with chaos. You curl tighter under your cloak, pressing hands to ears as though that could silence visions. But sleep is no friend on the frozen front. It offers no rest, only another battlefield in which you fight until dawn. When morning finally comes, pale light spreading across the camp, you feel no relief. Your body has lain down, but your mind has marched all night. You rise heavier than before, footsteps dragging, eyes ringed with shadows darker than the bags of provisions slung over your back. In winter's grip, even rest can wound you. You wake from those fractured, haunted dreams, and for a moment the silence disorients you. It is not the noisy quiet of men shuffling or horses snorting, but an almost unnatural stillness. Snow has fallen thick across the camp, muffling every sound, swallowing even the coughs and whispers of your companions. You lie there, ears straining, and realize you cannot even hear the wind anymore. The world has been wrapped in white cloth, and the silence is so complete it unsettles you more than any battlefield roar. Medieval chroniclers noticed this strange hush as well. Writers describing campaigns in Scandinavia or the Alps often remarked that heavy snow created a sleeping land, where even armies of thousands seemed to vanish into dreamlike stillness. They noted how horns sounded weaker, how footsteps dulled, how even shouted orders carried only a short distance before being smothered. You can feel it now, your own breath seems loud, your heartbeat echoing in your ears like a drum. The sensation is eerie. Snow covers tents and straw piles alike, rounding their sharp corners until everything resembles lumps of the earth. Men buried under cloaks look more like mounds than bodies. When you glance around, the camp seems transformed into a graveyard, each snow-covered shape a marker of the living and the dead alike. There is an unusual note in a Swiss soldier's journal from the Burgundian Wars. He described waking after a storm and panicking because the camp appeared deserted, only to discover his comrades hidden beneath smooth mounds of snow. "I thought I was the last man alive," he wrote, "until they all began to stir like beasts from burrows." It is not hard to imagine your own heart racing at such a sight. Scholars continue to debate the psychological effect of such quiet on medieval soldiers. Some argue it provided brief moments of peace, a chance to feel insulated from war. Others insist the silence was unnerving, amplifying paranoia, making every crack of ice or flutter of snow seem like enemy movement. Perhaps it depended on the man. For one, a gift. For another, torment. The sensory experience of this silence is unforgettable. You lie on your straw, listening so hard you begin to invent sounds. Was that the crunch of a footstep? Or only snow collapsing from a branch? Was that a distant horn? Or the groan of ice? The mind fills the void, creating noise to explain the absence of it. Sleep becomes fragile, because every imagined sound jolts you awake. The smell, by contrast, is almost absent. Snow strips the air of odor, leaving behind only faint traces, smoke from hidden fires, the must of wool, the sour tang of sweat. It feels sterile, empty, as though the world itself has been rinsed clean. You breathe it in deeply, and the cold bites your nostrils, sharp and metallic, like inhaling frozen iron. And yet, snow's silence also soothes. In that muffled world, voices drop to whispers. Men speak softly without realizing it, as if afraid to break a spell. You curl deeper into your cloak, eyelids heavy, lulled by the absence of sound. For a moment, the horrors of battle feel far away, smothered under the same white blanket that covers your camp. One curious superstition clung to this silence. Some soldiers believed snow muffled not only sound but also prayer. They whispered extra loudly to ensure their words reached heaven, afraid the snow might swallow them before they could rise. Picture a weary man lying in a hollow, muttering his Ave Maria louder than usual, convinced God might otherwise miss him. From above, the scene is haunting. A plain stretched wide, dotted with pale humps of snow, no firelight, no voices, an army invisible, hidden in stillness. It would seem deserted if not for the faint curls of smoke drifting upward, or the sudden movement of a cloak shaking off its snowy crust. You close your eyes, surrendering to that silence. At first it unsettles, then it lulls. Your breath steadies, your mind softens, and for the first time in many nights, you feel close to peace. Snow may numb, may bury, but it also soothes. Wrapped in its quiet, you let yourself drift, imagining the world outside the war has finally fallen asleep too. And so you sleep, blanketed not by straw or wool alone, but by silence itself, thick, heavy, absolute. A silence that cradles, unnerving and comforting at once, holding you in its frozen embrace until the pale light of dawn returns. The silence lingers, broken at last by the low clink of a jug being passed around. When warmth cannot be found in straw or snow, men turn to drink. Tonight, as you curl in your cloak, the sharp scent of ale drifts through the camp, carried on laughter that sounds more defiant than merry. You watch as a comrade tips his head back, letting the liquid spill past cracked lips, and for a moment he sighs as though the frost has lifted. Ale, beer, and sometimes stronger spirits were constant companions on campaign. Records from the 100 Years' War mention barrels hauled alongside carts of grain, guarded as jealously as coin. In winter, drink served two purposes. It dulled the edge of misery, and it helped men believe they were warmer, if only for a little while. You know this illusion well. The burn in your throat feels like fire spreading to your chest, tricking you into thinking your fingers no longer ache. but the truth waits for morning. Physicians of the time, as rare as they were on campaign, sometimes warned that heavy drinking left men weaker against the cold. The heat you feel is your body's last reserves burning faster. By dawn, many woke colder than before, shivering with hangovers that felt like punishment from the weather itself. And yet, despite the cost, drink remained irresistible. One unusual entry in a Polish knight's journal describes soldiers heating ale with hot stones, dropping the rocks fresh from the fire into wooden mugs. The drink hissed and steamed, filling the air with a sweet, malty perfume. He claimed it tasted of smoke and earth, as though one swallowed the hearth itself. You can imagine cupping such a vessel in frozen hands, the warmth seeping into your palms even before the first sip. There is disagreement among historians about how widespread the use of strong spirits was in medieval campaigns. Some point out that distilled liquors, like brandy, were not common until later centuries. Others argue that soldiers occasionally encountered them, especially in southern regions where knowledge of distillation spread earlier. Whether wine, ale, or something harsher, what matters to you tonight is the way liquid fire fills your belly and blurs the misery of the cold. The sensory atmosphere shifts with drink. Voices grow louder, laughter bursts suddenly, and the camp seems alive again despite the snow pressing in. You hear songs slurred, verses half remembered, choruses shouted in unison. Cloaks flap as men gesture wildly, telling stories bigger than life. Even the horses prick their ears at the noise, snorting as though amused by human folly. The smell of ale mixes with the usual camp odors, adding a yeasty sweetness to the sour perfume of wool and sweat. For a moment, it feels almost festive, as though the camp has transformed into a tavern under the stars. You close your eyes and can almost picture yourself back home, sitting near a hearth, tankard in hand, surrounded by friends who are not destined to bleed tomorrow. Yet the dangers remain. Drunken men stumble from their shelters, collapsing in snowdrifts where sleep turns quickly to death. Others quarrel, fists swinging, blades drawn too hastily. Chroniclers note more than one winter night where ale led to bloodshed among supposed comrades. But equally, drink smoothed tensions, dulling resentments, making men laugh at hardships instead of despair. Which outcome would visit you tonight was always uncertain. Superstitions grew around this practice too. Some believed that sharing a cup before sleep bound men together, ensuring that their spirits would remain warm even if their bodies froze. Others muttered that too much drink invited demons, that drunken sleep was easier prey for wandering souls of the dead. You picture a soldier crossing himself hurriedly after draining his mug, trying to outwit both frost and phantoms in a single gesture. Finally, you take a sip yourself. The liquid is sour, strong, and rough against your throat, but it carries a weight heavier than taste. It is ritual, camaraderie, rebellion. You feel it spread warmth into your chest, though you know it is only a lie. Still, the lie comforts. You lie back, letting the dizziness soften the edges of the night. The cold no longer bites so sharply. Your dreams, when they come, will be muddled and strange. And when dawn arrives, pale and pitiless, you will pay the price. Your head will pound, your mouth will taste of iron, and your body will shake harder than before. Yet tonight, for these brief hours, the ale has done its work. It has given you the illusion of warmth, and illusions are sometimes enough to carry a soldier through the longest night. The echo of laughter fades, the jug of ale runs dry, and men begin to murmur words older than drink. You notice heads bowing, hands clasping, lips moving in the dim glow of embers. For many soldiers, prayer was as vital as straw or cloak, a final act before surrendering to the night. Faith, whether strong or wavering, gave the illusion of a shield against frost and fear alike. Chronicles of crusading armies describe this scene often. Ranks of weary men kneeling in snow, their cloaks pulled tightly as they whispered psalms. Captains might lead a communal prayer, or priests pass through the camp with blessings, sprinkling icy water that froze almost as soon as it landed. Even in wars waged for land or plunder, the words of faith followed soldiers into their sleep. You picture yourself lying on your bedding, drawing a shaky cross on your chest, whispering a prayer through lips so numb they can barely form the words. The words drift like smoke into the night, fragile, almost lost in the wind, yet you believe they matter. They are a tether to home, to mothers and churches, to the idea that someone beyond the stars might be watching. One unusual detail comes from the diary of a Spanish mercenary. He claimed to sleep each night with a small wooden cross tied around his wrist. If he died in the cold, he hoped the charm would guide his soul before frost stole his body. Another account mentions knights tucking tiny relics into their bedrolls, fragments of saintly bones or slivers of parchment inscribed with prayers. Whether such objects truly warmed them mattered less than the comfort they brought. Among scholars today, there is no agreement about how devout the average soldier remained during exhausting campaigns. Some argue piety deepened in winter, when mortality felt close and unavoidable. Others suggest faith faltered, that men cursed heaven more than praised it as frost gnawed their fingers. Perhaps both were true. Soldiers could pray one night and blaspheme the next, caught in the shifting tides of despair and hope. The sounds of prayer blend with the night. A chorus of murmured Ave Marias drifts through the camp, overlapping, out of rhythm yet strangely harmonious. The words are half mumbled, half sung, carrying a lullaby quality even when spoken with desperation. You listen, eyelids heavy, and the cadence calms you more than ale ever could. The smell of devotion is faint but distinct. Wax candles flicker in noblemen's tents, their smoke curling sweet and heavy. For common soldiers, the smell comes instead from incense scraps, stolen from churches and burned in tiny bundles. It mingles with campfire smoke, creating a perfume both sacred and profane. The scent lingers in your cloak, clinging to wool, so that even when the prayers end, you breathe the reminder of them. Prayer also provided routine, a way to mark the end of day. You think of monks in cloisters, chanting compline before bed. Soldiers, though far from cloisters, echoed the same rhythms, grounding themselves in familiar rituals. Even when lice crawled, rats scurried, and frost crept into their bones, the whispered words created the illusion of order. There was superstition, too. Some men believed praying aloud too strongly might alert wandering spirits to their presence, so they whispered instead, barely audible. Others claimed sleeping without a prayer invited nightmares or death. A curious folk practice is noted in a Norman manuscript. Soldiers would spit 3 times before reciting prayers, believing the act drove away evil spirits. The combination of spit and scripture seems strange, but you can imagine a desperate man doing anything for a sense of safety. You lie back now, hands folded under your cloak, lips moving quietly. Your words are simple protection, warmth, survival. You do not ask for victory, not tonight, only for dawn, and for your heart to keep beating until it comes. Around you, others do the same. The camp hums with whispered pleas, like a hive buzzing under snow. The effect is oddly soothing. The cold remains, the straw scratches, the lice bite, but prayer gives shape to the misery. You feel part of something larger than your suffering. You drift into half-sleep with the words still on your tongue, as though carrying them into dreams might keep the nightmares at bay. And when morning comes, whether you wake in warmth or in ice, you know the prayer has already done its work. It has given you peace enough to close your eyes. On the medieval front lines, that peace was rare, fragile, and worth more than any blanket. You drift off with whispered prayers still lingering, only to be stirred again by a different kind of warmth, the breathing, stamping presence of horses nearby. Animals were as much a part of the medieval camp as men, and in winter their bodies became more than transport or war machines. They were radiators of heat, companions that gave off steaming warmth in the freezing dark. You turn your head on the straw and see silhouettes of horses shifting, tails flicking, vapor curling from their nostrils. The smell of them musky, earthy, sharp with hay fills the night. Campaign records from Livonia and Poland note that soldiers often bedded down as close to horses as possible. In barns, men slept side by side with the beasts, pressed against their flanks, grateful for the heat. On open fields, they tied the animals close, creating windbreaks of flesh and fur. It may sound odd to modern ears, but for a soldier shivering in snow, a horse was more reliable than any fire. You crawl closer, feeling the ground already warmer where hooves have churned straw. A horse shifts and exhales, hot breath puffing against your cheek, and you shiver not from cold but from the sudden comfort of it. You press your back to the beast's side, cloak tucked tight, and the animal grunts softly, accepting you as one more presence in the night. One curious anecdote appears in a Scandinavian chronicle. Soldiers were said to sleep beneath their horses, crawling under bellies to share body heat. It sounds far-fetched, almost comic, yet the chronicler swore he witnessed it. Perhaps desperate men truly did nestle beneath the arch of ribs and legs, trusting the animal's bulk to shield them from wind. Whether or not you believe it, the image clings the soldier curled under his steed, the bond of survival stronger than that of war. Scholars continue to disagree on how intentional this practice was. Some argue it was a last resort, used only when fire and straw were absent. Others insist it was common, especially in northern Europe, where barns and stables became temporary barracks for men and beasts alike. The truth likely shifts with circumstance, but the stories show one thing clearly: warmth cared little for species. The sensory details are overwhelming. Horses shift constantly, their hooves thudding softly against frozen ground. Their hides are coarse, warm, and damp with sweat that never fully dries. The smell is pungent, sweet hay, sour manure, the iron tang of tack. To modern noses it might seem foul, but to you, lying there with numb fingers finally thawing, it is the perfume of safety. You listen to the rhythm of their breathing, slow and steady, a lullaby of enormous lungs. It is strangely calming, even majestic, to be cradled by such sound. You close your eyes, and for a moment you are a child again, hearing the heartbeat of a farm animal back home, safe in a stable far from war. The presence of horses also brought dangers. Men spoke of being kicked awake, hooves striking out in the dark. Others told stories of lice and fleas leaping from beasts to men, spreading disease more efficiently than any enemy scout. Still, the risk was preferable to freezing. One knight famously wrote that he would rather endure the stink of 1,000 horses than the silence of the grave. There was also superstition. Some believed sleeping close to horses drew strength from them, that their stamina would pass into your body by contact. Others feared the opposite, that a dying horse's spirit might cling to a man and weaken him. To counter this, soldiers sometimes braided horsehair into charms, tying them to belts or cloaks as protection. You imagine yourself fingering such a talisman in the dark, half believing in its power. The scene is intimate in its own strange way. A row of men pressed against a row of beasts, steam rising together, the warmth of humanity and animal mingling. The snow outside falls unnoticed, the wind muted by bulk and breath. In that shared cocoon, war recedes for a moment. You are not knight or foot soldier, not lord or servant. You are only a body seeking heat, grateful for the life beside you. And when sleep comes, it is deeper than most. Your limbs, thawed by the horse's body, loosen at last. The heartbeat beneath your ear lulls you into slumber. Dreams still come, perhaps of hoofbeats and open fields, but they are gentler than the terrors of battle. You rest, knowing that tonight, survival belongs not only to you but also to the animal that shelters you. When dawn breaks, pale and icy, you rise, stiff but alive. The horse stamps, shakes its mane, and you pat its flank in silent thanks. The bond may be unspoken, but in the frozen night it was as strong as any oath. You survived because of the warmth of another creature, a truth as old as mankind itself. The morning begins with a cough dry at first, then wet, rattling, a sound that echoes through the camp more ominously than any war horn. You pull your cloak tighter, but the sound repeats from another shelter, then another. The cold has not only frozen the ground, it has also crept into men's lungs. Illness is an uninvited guest, and in the cramped quarters of a winter camp, it spreads with ruthless ease. Contemporary accounts from winter sieges are filled with such descriptions. Chroniclers of the long siege of Tournai in 1340 wrote of the hacking chorus of men at night, a grim symphony of lungs struggling against frost. It was not just one or two, the cough seemed to move like wind through the camp, taking one man today, his neighbor tomorrow. In some armies, disease cut down more soldiers than any enemy sword. You lie back, trying to ignore it, but the sound of coughing is impossible to escape. It punctuates the silence, jagged and irregular. Some coughs are harsh, like bark snapping. Others are weak, whistling through narrowed throats. Each one shakes the straw beds, and each one reminds you that cold air has no mercy on flesh. The smell of sickness hangs faintly in the air, sour breath, sweat soaked into wool, sometimes even the metallic tang of blood when men cough too hard. The odor blends with smoke and manure until the entire camp becomes a heavy fog of discomfort. You wrinkle your nose, but soon the stench becomes just another part of your world. One unusual note comes from a German soldier's memoir. He described comrades sleeping with onions tied around their necks, believing the smell warded off illness. Another anecdote mentions garlic cloves stuffed into boots, a crude charm against winter fevers. Whether these tricks worked is doubtful, but they show the desperation of men unwilling to let coughs rob them of already fragile rest. Modern historians remain divided over how much of this illness was pneumonia, influenza, or simply chronic exposure to cold. Some argue that medieval soldiers lacked the vocabulary to distinguish between them, lumping all under vague terms like the winter sickness. Others suggest their descriptions of rattling lungs and bloody phlegm match well with what we now recognize as bronchitis or tuberculosis. Whatever the precise diagnosis, the result was the same. Men struggled to breathe, and sleep became shallow, broken by fits of coughing. The soundscape of a winter night in camp is shaped by these coughs. Imagine drifting off, only to be jolted awake by a hacking fit beside you. You turn, irritated, only to realize your neighbor is wheezing so hard his whole body shakes. Another man groans, pulls his cloak over his head, and tries to muffle his own cough. The chorus builds and fades, like waves crashing against a frozen shore. Yet despite the misery, there is also care. Comrades share scraps of cloth as makeshift scarves, offer the warmest spot near the horse, or give away the last sip of hot broth to soothe a friend's throat. War strips away comfort, but it cannot always erase compassion. You can feel it in the small gestures, one soldier rubbing another's back as he coughs, another adjusting straw so the sick man might lie more comfortably. Superstitions followed illness too. Some believed coughing at night meant death was near, that the body was already surrendering. Others muttered that demons of the air rode the winter winds, slipping into lungs while men slept. To ward them off, charms were hung at the entrance of shelters, bits of iron, sprigs of juniper, crosses carved into wooden posts. Whether you believed or not, you took comfort in these tokens, because belief itself was sometimes the only medicine. The sensory toll is relentless. Your ears ring with coughs, your throat feels raw from breathing icy air, your skin prickles with fever, even as your hands remain numb. You shift on the straw, trying to find a position that eases your breathing, but every inhale burns. Sleep comes only in short bursts, interrupted by spasms that shake you awake again. Still, exhaustion triumphs. You doze despite the noise, despite the sickness pressing in. Dreams come muddled, feverish, filled with strange warmths and chills. You wake sweating, though the air is freezing, cloak damp against your skin. Around you, others groan the same way, caught between sickness and survival. By morning, the camp is sluggish. Men rise late, voices hoarse, bodies trembling. Some cannot rise at all, left curled in their straw while others march on. And as you prepare to move again, you understand the cruel truth. War is not always lost to enemy steel. Sometimes it is lost to the endless cough of winter nights. You shuffle awake in the half-light, throat raw, ears still echoing with the coughs of the night before. The sky above is a dull iron lid, clouds pressed heavy and close. Then suddenly the silence shatters. A horn splits the air, long and harsh, followed by another blast from farther down the line. The sound slices through the muffled quiet of snow like a blade through cloth. Your heart jolts, and before you even understand the call, the entire camp begins to stir. Enemy attacks at dawn are the oldest trick in the soldier's book, and they are feared precisely because they so often succeed. Chroniclers from the Scottish wars wrote often of raids that came just before sunrise, when men were still tangled in cloaks and half asleep. Armies knew that winter made vigilance harder, guards weary, fires dim, bodies heavy with exhaustion. And so they struck at the hour when sleep was deepest, when frost clung hardest, when the world itself seemed most reluctant to rise. You roll from your straw bed, fumbling for your boots. The ground bites your bare feet, but there is no time to curse. Around you men stumble, shouting, tripping over one another as they reach for spears and swords. Some are still coughing, others rubbing eyes raw with fatigue, but all know the meaning of horns in the dawn. It means survival has just become a matter of seconds. The sensory chaos overwhelms. The cold air burns your lungs as you gasp, the smell of smoke and sweat intensifying as fires are stoked hastily. Horses scream, hooves hammering frozen ground. Leather creaks, metal clatters, voices rise in curses and prayers all at once. The quiet camp of moments ago transforms into a storm of motion, 1,000 tiny sounds clashing like steel on steel. One unusual note comes from a Burgundian account. Soldiers sometimes slept with boots and belts still on, precisely so they could leap up at the first horn. It meant restless, uncomfortable nights, but also faster readiness when dawn brought danger. You can imagine the discomfort of never truly stripping down, always half-armored even in sleep. Yet perhaps that discomfort saved lives when enemies descended out of the mist. Historians continue to debate how often such raids succeeded. Some argue they were decisive, breaking armies before battle lines could form. Others insist most dawn attacks were minor harassment, meant to rattle nerves rather than destroy. Either way, the effect on sleep was certain. Men never rested fully, always half listening for the dreaded horn. You know it too well, the way you drift into dream with one ear still straining towards silence. The attack itself may or may not reach you. Sometimes horns sound only in warning, and the enemy never materializes. Other times arrows arc suddenly through the pale sky, dark lines vanishing into snow. A man beside you collapses, straw clinging to his cloak as he hits the ground. The reality of war crashes down before you can even shake the last fog of sleep from your mind. Superstitions cling to these dawn raids. Some soldiers believed that demons stirred armies into battle at first light, that the devil favored chaos when the world was most vulnerable. Others claimed that roosters crowing early in the camp was a sign of impending attack, a natural alarm louder than any horn. You can almost hear a rooster's cry mingling with horns, a reminder that life and war often sound alike. The emotional toll is heavier still. Imagine waking from nightmares of battle only to find real battle waiting at your door. Sleep offers no escape. Instead, it becomes rehearsal for terror. The line between dream and waking collapses, leaving only panic and steel. You grip your weapon with trembling fingers, not sure if your heart is racing from memory or from the enemy before you. And yet, even amid this terror, routine emerges. Captains shout orders, men form ragged lines, shields lock together. Training and habit take over where sleep-deprived minds falter. You join the movement, barely aware of your body's actions, running on instinct carved by countless drills. The enemy may strike, or may vanish into mist, but you know the morning will never be quiet again. When the horns finally cease, When the alarm proves real or false, the damage is already done. Sleep has been shattered, nerves frayed, and the day begins not with rest but with dread. You sink back into your straw later, body shaking, eyes wide open though the danger has passed. For the rest of the campaign, you will never truly trust the silence of dawn. The horns fall silent, the shouting dies down, and yet you cannot sink back into sleep. Your body aches from the rush of fear, your heart still beating too fast. You lie there thinking, even if the enemy does not come, how will you ever rest in such conditions? Survival at night is a puzzle, solved with scraps and wit, and so men turn to improvised tricks, transforming whatever they can find into bedding. One well-documented detail from campaigns in Flanders describes soldiers stuffing their bedrolls with moss gathered from riverbanks. The soft green tufts, normally ignored beneath boots, became cushions against the frozen ground. Dampness was a risk, but in desperate times the sponge-like plants at least softened the hardness of earth. You imagine lying on such a bed, the faint smell of marsh clinging to your cloak, your body grateful for any illusion of comfort. Reeds and rushes appear in sources as well. Soldiers pulled them from river edges, weaving them into crude mats. These mats crunched beneath weight, releasing a grassy, earthy odor that carried memories of summer fields. In damp regions, peasants had long used similar tricks to cover flaws in cottages, and armies borrowed the same methods. You picture men weaving reeds together by firelight, fingers stiff, but minds comforted by the rhythm of work. Then come the stranger measures. A curious anecdote from a Hungarian chronicle mentions soldiers laying down piles of dried dung to sleep upon, swearing that it insulated better than straw. It sounds absurd, even revolting, but in reality animal waste, when dry, burned slowly as fuel and held heat longer than plain soil. The smell, of course, must have been unbearable, sharp, acrid, clinging to cloaks. Yet soldiers accepted it, muttering that foul comfort was better than none at all. Scholars remain divided about how widespread these improvised tricks truly were. Some argue such measures were exceptional, noted precisely because of their oddity. Others insist they were common, pointing out that armies often stripped landscapes bare of wood and straw, leaving only moss, reeds, and dung as options. Perhaps the truth is that every region bred its own desperate solutions, as soldiers shaped their nights from whatever the land grudgingly offered. The sensory world of these tricks is rich. Moss feels spongy and damp, clinging cold to your skin. Reeds creak like brittle bones when you shift, their sharp edges scratching through cloth. Dried dung crumbles under pressure, releasing a cloud of dust that stings the nose. And yet, when you close your eyes, each surface, however unpleasant, forms a barrier between your body and the cruel frost beneath. There is also a psychological comfort in making something with your own hands. Imagine gathering reeds, weaving them into a mat, then lying upon it and thinking, "This was not here before, but I made it, and it will keep me alive." The act itself becomes a small rebellion against the cold, proof that you still have some power in a world that strips power away. Superstitions crept into these practices too. Some soldiers believed sleeping on moss brought dreams of forests and good omens, while sleeping on dung invited nightmares of demons. Others swore reeds whispered at night, carrying messages from spirits of rivers. You might laugh at such ideas, but in the dark, with snow falling, every rustle and creak feels like a voice. One unusual story comes from a French mercenary who wrote that he stuffed his boots with dried leaves, not just for warmth, but for their murmuring, which made me dream of home. He claimed the sound of leaves shifting against his feet reminded him of autumn woods, comforting him into sleep. You can almost hear it yourself. The faint rustle with each movement, nature whispering lullabies inside your clothing. The camp becomes a patchwork of these tricks. Some men lie on straw stolen earlier, others on moss scraped from trees, still others on mats of reeds or piles of leaves. Each shelter smells different, each man's bed telling a story of what he could scavenge. The collective odor is dizzying sweet hay, earthy moss, sour dung, sharp reeds all layered atop the must of wool and smoke. You wrinkle your nose, but you also smile faintly. This is what survival smells like. You shift on your own makeshift bedding, feeling the uneven lumps beneath you. It is not comfort in any true sense, but it is enough. Your body rests, your mind drifts, and for a few hours you sleep. Improvised tricks may not silence hunger or stop disease, but they grant you the one gift every soldier craves: a fragile barrier between flesh and frost. When morning comes, you rise stiff, brushing bits of moss or reed from your cloak. You curse the smell that clings to you, yet you are alive. And as you shoulder your pack and prepare to march again, you realize that the night's discomfort was, in its own way, a victory. You bent the world, however slightly, to give you rest. In winter war, such small victories matter more than banners or boasts. By now you have learned to treat every scrap as treasure, yet one burden follows you no matter how clever your tricks: armor. At dawn you see men shivering not just from cold but from the iron and steel that clings to their bodies. The dilemma is simple. Do you strip off your protection and risk being caught unready? Or do you sleep inside it and let the frost gnaw at your bones? Medieval records confirm this was no small question. Chroniclers of the Hussite Wars describe soldiers bedding down in chainmail, helmets still nearby, convinced an ambush might come before sunrise. Others stripped everything, curling naked beneath cloaks, trusting their comrades to rouse them if horns blew. Both choices carried peril. You imagine yourself tugging at the buckles of your mail shirt, hands numb, wondering whether to endure the bite of iron or the bite of fear. The physical experience of sleeping in armor is misery. Chainmail stiffens in the cold, each link like a frozen bead pressing into flesh. Plate grows colder still, sucking warmth away as if the metal itself is thirsty for heat. The smell is unpleasant iron mingling with sweat, rust with damp wool. If you try to rest in it, the weight drags at your muscles, your shoulders ache, and your back feels as though you are lying on a bed of stones. Yet some soldiers did so regardless. One curious note from a Burgundian memoir mentions men stuffing straw beneath their armor before lying down, hoping to create insulation between flesh and steel. Another account claims soldiers used saddles as makeshift pillows to keep breastplates slightly off the ground, easing the chill. These solutions sound absurd, but you can imagine the desperation behind them. Among historians, there is no full agreement on how common it was to actually sleep in armor. Some insist most men removed at least part of it, if only to avoid suffocating fatigue. Others argue that in volatile campaigns, sleeping armed was routine, especially for cavalry who expected dawn raids. Likely it varied. Knights perhaps more cautious, peasants more resigned to risk. The sensory toll is severe. Lying in armor, you hear every creak of leather straps, every clink of shifting links. Each time you roll, the sound betrays you to your companions, who mutter curses at being woken. Your skin itches beneath padding stiff with salt, and the air trapped under the plates grows clammy, more uncomfortable than the cold outside. Yet removing armor is no salvation either. You strip it away, sighing in relief, only to lie awake imagining the horn sounding, the enemy rushing in while you scramble half-dressed. Your body relaxes, but your mind stays taut, as though the absence of armor is itself a form of exposure. You fall asleep in fragments, waking often to reach for your sword or to check your helmet still lies nearby. Superstition colored this dilemma as well. Some men believed sleeping in armor prevented evil spirits from entering their bodies, that steel itself was holy protection. Others swore the opposite, that resting in mail angered the saints, who saw it as arrogance. To counter this, charms were sometimes tied to breastplates, tiny crosses, scraps of scripture, even feathers thought to soften dreams. You picture a soldier fingering a feather tied to his gorget, muttering a prayer that both cold and spirits pass him by. The soundscape of such nights is unmistakable. The camp rustles with metal, an orchestra of muted clinks as men shift in their gear. Horses stir at the noise, stamping nervously, as though they too sense the unease of bodies encased in steel. The silence between clinks is worse, heavy with the knowledge that no one truly sleeps well, not armored, not unarmored. And so you lie there, caught in the dilemma. Armor on, and your body stiffens into misery. Armor off, and your mind spins with fear. In truth, there is no right choice, only endurance. You close your eyes, listening to the wind scrape at your tent, and remind yourself that dawn will come whether you are prepared or not. When light finally rises, you are sore, unrested, and colder than before. Yet you survived the night, which is more than can be said for many. You stand, stretch aching shoulders, and fasten buckles with fingers that tremble from frost. Around you, others do the same, some grimacing from the bruises of steel, others yawning from sleepless fear. Either way, the camp is alive again. The dilemma remains unsolved, waiting for the next night. But for now you march forward, knowing that survival sometimes means sleeping in the arms of your armor, no matter how cruel its embrace. You rise stiff from the night's cruel embrace of armor and wool, and soon your eyes wander across the camp. Not every face belongs to a soldier. Along the edges of tents and makeshift shelters, shadows move women, children, old men. They are the camp followers, those who march not for banners but for bread, for wages, for the survival that comes from attaching themselves to an army. And in winter, their presence changes how and where soldiers sleep. Contemporary chronicles rarely dwell on these people, yet their existence is undeniable. Records of Burgundian, French, and imperial armies mention wives and wenches trailing behind, as well as washerwomen, cooks, smiths, and even travelling merchants. Some were relatives of soldiers, others were simply desperate peasants clinging to the shadow of war. You imagine your own shelter, suddenly fuller, shared not only with comrades but with strangers bound to the army by necessity. The dynamic shifts. When a woman curls beside a soldier, the warmth is real and immediate. Two bodies pressed close offer more insulation than any cloak. It may be love, lust, or mere transaction, but the physical comfort is undeniable. You picture lying with your back against another figure, feeling the soft rhythm of her breathing, hearing whispered words that distract you, if only briefly, from the sound of coughing and the memory of horns. One unusual detail comes from a soldier's letter after the siege of Orléans. He claimed that children belonging to camp followers sometimes slept piled in the middle of a hut, the adults circling around them to keep the youngest warm. The image is striking, a family unit preserved in the harshest conditions, creating warmth by sheer proximity. For hardened soldiers, hearing the laughter or cries of children in camp must have been both unsettling and strangely grounding. Historians remain divided on how much comfort followers truly provided. Some argue they were essential, keeping morale alive by offering services, companionship, and a reminder of ordinary life. Others stress the tensions they created, jealousies among men, the spread of disease, or the burden of mouths to feed in already starving camps. Whatever the debate, you feel the truth in the warmth at your side. On frozen nights, presence mattered more than politics. The sensory world of a shared tent grows richer. You smell not only wool and smoke, but also the faint sweetness of bread baked by followers, the musk of bodies that have not marched all day, the perfume of herbs some women carried for trade or superstition. The air thickens with sound, two snatches of lullabies sung to children, the rustle of skirts, the low murmur of voices telling stories. Compared to the snoring and coughing of soldiers alone, it is almost a domestic comfort, a reminder of hearth and home transported into the wilderness. But intimacy also complicates. Quarrels break out over who gets to share space with whom. Accusations fly of favoritism or betrayal. A curious anecdote survives in a German chronicle. One winter, two men fought bitterly over a single blanket owned by a washerwoman, both claiming she had promised to share it. The fight ended with bruises, not death, but the chronicler noted it as proof that in winter, Cloth was as precious as coin. Superstitions followed camp followers too. Some soldiers believed women brought luck, that their presence softened God's judgment. Others insisted the opposite, that women in camp angered saints, bringing punishment in the form of storms and sickness. You imagine yourself lying awake, listening to whispers of such debates, your own mind torn between gratitude for the warmth and fear of divine wrath. Yet whatever the theology, the reality remained. Followers shared the same ground, the same straw, the same hunger. When snow pressed heavy against the camp, everyone huddled close, distinctions between soldier and follower blurring. You can almost feel the shared body heat, the shuffle of cloaks rearranged to cover more than one figure, the sigh of relief when cold is momentarily kept at bay. The presence of followers also meant stories. As you drift in and out of sleep, you hear voices telling tales not of battle, but of farms, markets, festivals. Women recall the scent of bread baking at home. Children chatter about rivers and meadows far from war. These words seep into dreams, blending with your own memories until the battlefield feels like a distant nightmare. You fall asleep to such sounds, wrapped in stolen warmth and whispered fragments of a world that once existed outside the front lines. For a few hours, war loosens its grip. You are no longer just a soldier pressed against a frozen earth. You are part of a camp, a strange, mismatched family of warriors, workers, wives, and children, all fighting the same invisible battle against winter's merciless cold. And when morning comes, the followers rise too, gathering pots, tending fires, brushing snow from tents. They vanish back into their roles as invisible laborers. But at night, you remember them, because in the stillness of frozen winters, the warmth of another human presence can matter more than all the weapons in the world. Night returns, and with it, another mood altogether. The clouds thin, the storm passes, and the camp lies beneath a silver veil of moonlight. You step outside your shelter and feel the strangeness immediately. The way snow glows pale blue, the way shadows stretch long and sharp, the way every movement seems exaggerated in this otherworldly light. Sleep becomes more elusive beneath such brilliance. You lie down again, close your eyes, and yet the moon presses against your lids as though it will not let you forget its watchful gaze. Chroniclers from the northern campaigns often remarked on this eerie brightness. They spoke of nights that seemed like half days, when snow reflected so much light that men claimed they could read manuscripts by it. To sleep in such conditions was difficult, for the body refused to believe it was night at all. You picture yourself turning restlessly, cloak pulled over your head, trying to hide from the silver glow seeping into every gap. One unusual observation comes from a Burgundian soldier's note. He swore that moonlight on snow caused madness, that men who stared at it too long became restless, unable to sleep, and prone to wild dreams. Whether science or superstition, you feel its truth in your own jittering nerves. The world looks unreal beneath the moon, and your thoughts grow restless in response. Among historians, there is debate about how soldiers adapted to this phenomenon. Some argue they welcomed it, using the light to maintain watch without torches. Others insist it unsettled men, robbing them of rest just as effectively as hunger or fear. Perhaps it did both, depending on whether you were guard or sleeper that night. The sensory experience of moonlit snow is overwhelming. The air feels colder somehow, sharper, every breath crystallizing instantly. Shadows stretch black and solid, moving when you move, startling you with their sudden reach. The camp looks both beautiful and ghostly, tents glowing faintly, horses outlined in silver, helmets glittering like frost crowns. It is as if you are living inside a dream carved from ice. Smells seem weaker in this brightness, as though moonlight itself washes them clean. Smoke fades, manure dulls, even sweat seems muted. Sound, by contrast, grows sharper. The creak of a saddle, the crunch of boots, the whisper of snow sliding from canvas. Every small noise carries far, amplified by silence and silver light. You lie listening, each sound a reminder that sleep will not come easily. Superstitions about moonlight abound in these nights. Some soldiers believed that sleeping under direct rays risked theft of the soul, that the moon drew it out through breath. To protect against this, they covered faces with cloaks or straw, creating barriers between themselves and the silver eye in the sky. Others whispered that moonlight preserved bodies, keeping frostbite away if you lay beneath it. You can imagine the argument. One man insisting the moon kills, another swearing it saves, both convinced by the strangeness of what they feel. A curious anecdote comes from a Venetian traveller who marched with mercenaries in the Alps. He noted that men sang softly under the moon, claiming music tamed its power. He described lullabies rising across the snowfields, soldiers humming like children until exhaustion finally overcame them. You picture yourself humming too, voice low, not to keep others awake, but to quiet the eerie silence. Lying beneath such a sky is haunting. You close your eyes but still see the glow, still sense the shadows pressing. Dreams come vivid, painted in silver tones. You wake certain you have seen ghosts drifting through camp, only to realize it is moonlight on tents. The line between reality and vision blurs until both feel equally unreal. And yet, there is beauty too. For all its unease, the moon offers moments of awe. You rise briefly, step outside, and see the snowfields stretching endlessly, sparkling as though 1,000 stars have fallen to earth. The cold bites your cheeks, but you feel humbled, small, part of something vast. When you return to your shelter, the image lingers, and though sleep remains restless, it carries a softer weight. By morning, the silver glow fades into grey dawn. You wake stiff, eyes heavy, head full of fragments of strange dreams. The memory of the moon remains a watchful guardian, a silent tormentor, a beauty you could not escape. You rise knowing that tonight it may shine again, and once more you will wrestle with its light while trying to find the oblivion of rest. The moonlight fades, leaving behind only memories of silver shadows. Yet when silence becomes too heavy, men search for another way to lull themselves toward rest. Tonight you hear it first as a hum, low, steady, almost like the buzzing of bees beneath snow. Then voices rise, weaving into one another. Not battle cries, but songs. Soldiers murmur melodies, sometimes tuneless, sometimes strangely beautiful, their voices trembling in the cold. Music was always present in medieval life, and campaigns were no exception. Chroniclers note that men sang on the march, in taverns, and yes, at night in camp. In winter, when cold numbed limbs and fear crept into dreams, songs became a fragile blanket of sound. You imagine yourself lying in straw, cloak pulled close, listening to voices rising softly through the stillness, each word a thread holding men together against frost and despair. One well-documented case comes from the Siege of Calais in 1347. English soldiers were said to sing ballads around their hidden fires, verses about home, about women waiting far away, about saints guarding them in battle. Their French counterparts, hearing the tunes drift across the lines, answered with their own songs. The night became not silent but layered with melodies, enemies united briefly by the same need for comfort. A curious anecdote appears in a Swiss account. Soldiers hummed children's lullabies they barely remembered, tunes their mothers once sang, words half forgotten. Men laughed quietly at the absurdity of hardened warriors whispering nursery songs, yet they did it anyway. The lullabies soothed in ways no hymn or march could, reminding each man of beds far warmer than straw. There is debate among historians about how structured these nightly songs were. Some suggest they were spontaneous, untrained voices rising whenever men felt restless. Others argue commanders encouraged singing to maintain morale, much like prayers or watch rotations. Perhaps both are true, some songs private, some public, all flowing naturally into the rhythm of camp life. The sensory world of song at night is vivid, voices tremble, breath visible as puffs of steam in the cold. The sound is muffled by snow, yet close enough to feel like a chorus inside your own shelter. You hear the scrape of a lute string, the dull thump of a drum beaten softly. Though instruments are rare, most music comes from the human body alone, fragile yet enduring. Smell and touch join the moment. Smoke curls faintly from hidden embers, carrying warmth into the songs. Wool scratches at your neck as you press Cloak closer, but somehow, even that discomfort fades when sound takes over. For a moment, hunger, lice, and frost vanish, replaced by melody. Superstitions cling to music too. Some soldiers believed certain chants warded off spirits that prowled winter camps. Others claimed singing invited angels to join, their voices blending invisibly in harmony. A darker whisper warned that if you sang too loudly, the enemy might hear and take courage from your vitality. You picture a captain shushing his men when their tune grows bold, fearful not of spirits but of scouts. The emotional weight of such singing is heavy. You lie listening to a comrade's voice crack, rough with exhaustion, yet still pressing forward through the melody. Another joins, then another, until the camp hums with sound. It is imperfect, off-key, but deeply human. You feel your eyes grow heavy, lulled not by silence but by the steady rhythm of shared song. Sometimes the lyrics themselves speak directly of the cold, songs of frost demons, of winter saints, of lovers waiting through snowstorms. Other times the words are nonsense, chosen only for rhyme and rhythm, their meaning irrelevant compared to their soothing repetition. You imagine humming nonsense syllables yourself, letting the rhythm blur thought into sleep. One unusual record from a Flemish company describes men whistling instead of singing, believing whistles kept wolves away. The high notes carried far across the snow, sharp and thin, an eerie lullaby that sounded more like ghosts than men. Yet they swore it worked, and in their belief, they found rest. Eventually, the camp grows quieter. Voices fade, the last hum drifts into silence, and men finally slip into uneasy dreams. You roll onto your side, head pillowed on your arm, and realize that though the night is still cold, the memory of song lingers in your ears. It warms you in ways straw and cloaks cannot, a reminder that even on Frontlines, humans carry music into the darkest hours. By dawn, the songs are forgotten, swallowed by the day's march. But in the night, for a few fragile minutes, melody turned a frozen battlefield into something almost tender. You close your eyes, humming softly, and let the echoes carry you into sleep. The echoes of song fade, and soon another rhythm takes their place, the steady chewing of men gnawing on whatever scraps of food remain. Sleep rarely comes on an empty stomach, and so rations, however meager, become part of the nightly ritual. You settle into your cloak and notice the smell of broth drifting faintly from a pot, the crunch of hard bread carried on the still air. Food is no feast in a winter camp, but it shapes the way bodies endure the night. Chronicles of Edward III's campaigns note soldiers warming themselves with thin stews, little more than water and bones, yet treasured as if they were rich banquets. Warm liquid filled bellies and created an illusion of heat, spreading comfort into limbs. You imagine cradling a wooden bowl, steam curling against your frozen face, sipping slowly to stretch the moment before lying down. One curious anecdote appears in a Bohemian account. Men roasted strips of horsehide over the fire, chewing the tough leather as though it were meat. The chronicler admitted it gave little nourishment, but kept jaws busy and minds distracted. You can almost feel the resistance of such a strip between your teeth, the smell acrid, the taste bitter, yet preferable to lying awake with gnawing hunger. Among scholars, there is disagreement over how much food truly influenced sleep. Some argue a hot meal was essential, providing energy to generate warmth through the night. Others believe the psychological comfort mattered more than the calories, that even a mouthful of warm liquid could trick the mind into resting. Perhaps both are true. The satisfaction of swallowing heat, even when your stomach still feels empty. The sensory world of night rations is vivid. Fires crackle, wood smoke thick in the air. The broth tastes faintly of marrow, of roots dug hastily from frozen soil, seasoned only by smoke and desperation. Hard bread creaks between your teeth, scattering crumbs onto your cloak. The smell of cooking lingers in every fold of wool, clinging sweet and sour at once. Superstitions followed food as much as prayer. Some soldiers believed eating garlic before sleep warded off evil spirits and illness alike. Others swore a mouthful of meat promised victorious dreams, while fasting led to nightmares. You imagine a comrade tucking a clove of garlic into his cloak, muttering that it would keep both cough and demons away. One unusual tale comes from a German mercenary who claimed he could only fall asleep after licking honey smeared on his fingers. He believed sweetness calmed the soul. His comrades mocked him, calling him the bee, but even ridicule could not shake his ritual. Whether it worked or not, he swore by it. The camp at night becomes a marketplace of smells and sounds. Some men sip stew, others crack bones to suck the marrow, others chew dried fish with a pungent salt stench. Every fire offers a different perfume, and the mixture fills the air until hunger and satisfaction blur. You close your eyes, lulled by the sound of chewing, the clatter of bowls, the murmur of men thanking God for scraps. After eating, warmth spreads briefly. Your body feels heavier, eyelids sinking with relief. You curl into straw, stomach no longer hollow, and rest comes easier. The cold is still there, the lice still crawl, the nightmares still wait, but food has created a fragile barrier, enough to let you drift. Yet morning reminds you of the fragility. Bellies growl again, bowls lie empty, and soldiers march on with nothing but memory. But in the night, rations gave comfort. They turned misery into something tolerable, if only for a few hours. You understand now why men guarded their bread as fiercely as swords. Without it, sleep was as dangerous as battle. So you lie back, breathing the smoky perfume of stew, feeling warmth trickle through your chest. Hunger may return tomorrow, but tonight your body surrenders. Rations are not luxury, but in the brutal winters of war, they are the closest thing to a lullaby your stomach will ever know. Your belly, though not full, carries enough warmth from that smoky stew to quiet its growling. But as you stretch out on straw again, you feel something else tugging at you, a flicker of longing that food and cloaks cannot satisfy. The night is heavy with memory. Around you, men mutter names in their sleep, or whisper them softly as though speaking to ghosts. Home lingers in every breath, and longing for it shapes the way you rest, or fail to rest, through the brutal winter. Chronicles hint at this yearning between the lines. A scribe describing the siege of Harfleur noted that men often carved initials into tent posts or scrawled crude images of women and children onto shields, staring at them before sleep as though they were charms. You picture yourself tracing a face in the dirt with a stick, then lying down beside it, as if a sketch could carry warmth. One curious anecdote survives in the writings of a Flemish archer. He kept a scrap of cloth from his wife's dress tied inside his tunic. At night he pressed it to his face, breathing in a scent long faded, imagining it was her beside him. The cloth was worn and dirty, but he swore it was the only thing that allowed him to sleep. You can almost feel the fragility of that scrap in your own fingers, a lifeline made of threads. Historians debate the role of homesickness in medieval armies. Some argue it was a constant, corrosive presence, weakening morale and fueling desertion. Others suggest soldiers were hardened by distance, their sense of belonging shifting to the comrades around them. Yet letters that survive tell the story clearly. Men dreamed of hearths, wives, and fields far away. No matter the discipline, longing slipped under cloaks and into straw each night. The sensory weight of homesickness is hard to ignore. You close your eyes and imagine the smell of bread baking in your mother's oven, only to open them to the stench of smoke and manure. You long for the softness of a feather bed, only to feel straw scratching your neck. You listen for familiar voices, only to hear coughs and snores. Sleep becomes a cruel trick. The mind returns home, but the body remains frozen on the front lines. Superstitions grew around these longings too. Some believed dreaming of family meant death was near, as though the soul was already preparing to leave. Others swore such dreams gave strength, reminding men what they fought for. You imagine the fear of waking from a dream of home, heart racing, wondering if it was comfort or omen. One unusual note comes from a Norman knight, who confessed that he could not sleep unless he whispered his children's names aloud. He claimed it was like calling them into the night to stand guard over him. His comrades teased him, yet many quietly adopted the same habit, murmuring names into the darkness as though stringing invisible rosaries of memory. The camp becomes a strange chorus of such murmurs. You lie on your side, cloak pulled tight, listening to half-heard words, names, places, fragments of prayers. The air hums with longing, as though every man carries an invisible tether stretched across leagues of snow and sea. For a moment, the battlefield feels less like exile, and more like a gathering of exiles, united by the ache of memory. The sensory world of longing sharpens dreams. In sleep, you see your house, warm and lit, your family gathered, the smell of wood smoke comforting instead of choking. You feel sheets against your skin, soft instead of coarse. The dream is so vivid you reach for it, only to wake with a start, fingers grasping nothing but straw. The pain of that moment lingers longer than frostbite, cutting deeper than cold. And yet, longing also sustains. You tell yourself that surviving the night means one day returning to what you love. You clutch scraps of cloth, murmur names, stare at crude drawings, not because they banish cold, but because they give it meaning. Sleep comes uneven, broken by dreams, but each dream holds a piece of home, and each piece strengthens your resolve to endure. By morning the ache remains, but so does the memory. You march on with frozen feet, but your heart carries the warmth of those you imagined beside you. Home is not near, but it has travelled with you into the night, shaping your dreams and keeping you alive when winter sought to take you. The ache of longing fades only slowly, replaced by another ritual that soldiers cling to in the dead of winter, the telling of stories. When the wind howls outside and snow presses against the canvas, voices inside a tent or hut rise to fill the darkness. You lie back, cloak wrapped tight, listening as comrades spin tales, their words weaving comfort almost as tangible as a blanket. Storytelling is older than war itself, but in campaigns it takes on particular weight. Chroniclers of the Baltic Crusades mention men passing the hours with words when sleep would not come. They told of saints and miracles, of past battles, of foolish comrades and clever escapes. Sometimes the stories were true, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes pure invention, but all of them were medicine against despair. Imagine the scene: a group of men hunched around a dim fire, their faces glowing red while the corners of the shelter lie in shadow. One man begins with a boast how he slew 3 enemies with one stroke. Another interrupts, swearing he saw the same man trip over his own spear. Laughter ripples through the group, breaking the tension, pushing Frost a little farther away. You smile too, because even if the tale is nonsense, it warms the night. One unusual anecdote appears in a Burgundian captain's notes. He described soldiers inventing riddles, challenging one another to answer before sleep. He wrote of one riddle, comparing snow to parchment and blood to ink, a dark joke that made men chuckle grimly. You can almost hear the riddle whispered in the night, the laughter that follows a laughter more precious because it defies misery. Historians debate how widespread such storytelling was. Some suggest it flourished in long sieges, when men had little else to do. Others argue it was spontaneous, erupting whenever men were too weary to march, but too restless to sleep. Either way, its effect is clear. Stories turned fear into amusement, made hunger bearable, and gave men a way to pass long nights without losing themselves to silence. The sensory atmosphere of storytelling is vivid. Words echo strangely in the small space, bouncing off canvas or wooden walls. Smoke drifts thick, forcing you to blink, but it adds to the intimacy, blurring faces until only voices matter. The smell of burning wood and damp wool clings, but laughter makes it tolerable. Touch is there too. You feel comrades leaning against you, shoulders pressed close, bodies warming one another as much as the fire does. Superstitions sometimes shaped the tales. Soldiers told ghost stories, swearing certain hills were haunted by men who froze in past winters. Others spoke of saints walking unseen through camps, protecting sleepers who whispered their names. Some believed telling such stories drew those spirits closer, while others swore it kept them at bay. You imagine the unease after a chilling tale, men glancing towards shadows, pulling cloaks tighter, yet smiling because the fear was shared. One curious fragment survives in a manuscript margin. A soldier scribbled a tale of a fox that crept into camp and stole bread, only to be chased by dogs until it circled back into a sleeping knight's cloak. The knight woke screaming, believing demons were dragging him to hell, only to find a terrified fox tangled in his blankets. The story was retold for years, laughter spreading through camps whenever nights grew too heavy. As you listen now, the rhythm of voices lulls you. One man tells of home, another of battles long past, another of saints who supposedly warmed soldiers' beds with invisible fires. The words rise and fall like waves, soothing in their pattern, until your eyes grow heavy. You drift not into silence, but into a dream where voices continue, their laughter echoing even as your mind sinks into sleep. The effect carries into morning. Though your body is still cold, your spirit feels lighter. You remember the jokes, the riddles, the tales of foxes and ghosts, and they follow you onto the march. Storytelling has given you something winter cannot take, the warmth of shared imagination. In the end, that warmth may matter as much as cloaks, straw, or fire. The stories fade into snores, but the camp never truly sleeps. Beyond the canvas, footsteps crunch in the snow. Somewhere, a cough echoes. Somewhere else, the clink of steel tells you that guards remain awake. For as much as men long for rest, an army must never let down its watch, not even in the depths of winter. And so through the night, sentries pace the perimeter, their weary bodies serving as the fragile wall between safety and slaughter. Chroniclers record these watches with weary sympathy. A monk describing the siege of Metz in 1324 wrote that guards were the most pitiful of men, forced to stand in darkness while their comrades snored. Wrapped in cloaks stiff with frost, they stamped their feet, blew into hands, and prayed dawn would come before the enemy. You imagine yourself drawing the unlucky lot for guard duty, stumbling into the cold, heart heavy with resentment but bound by duty all the same. The experience is brutal. The wind claws at your face until your skin feels like glass. The torch you carry sputters and smokes, more burden than aid. Your eyes water from the cold, and every breath forms clouds that seem louder than footsteps. You listen for enemies, but mostly you hear your own joints creaking, your own teeth clicking together. Sleep beckons constantly, whispering in every pause of silence. One unusual account from a Danish soldier describes tying a rope around his chest and fastening it to a stake, so that if he began to doze while standing watch, the pull of the rope would jerk him awake. Another chronicle mentions guards pricking their thighs with daggers to stay alert, blood running warm down their legs in the snow. Desperate tricks, but they reveal the toll of sleepless vigilance. Historians remain divided on how effective these guards truly were. Some argue winter raids often succeeded because men simply could not keep eyes open in freezing nights. Others suggest watch rotations were frequent enough, an hour or two at most, that most soldiers endured, however miserably. Perhaps the truth lies in both. Vigilance held more often than not, but when it failed catastrophically. The sensory world of night watch is stark. Silence stretches so wide that every creak of ice, every snap of twig, seems like a trumpet blast. Shadows leap and stretch under moonlight, tricking your weary eyes into seeing enemies where only trees stand. Your ears ache from straining at emptiness. Your nose stings from icy air. Your fingers burn with cold. Smells are sharper too. The faint smoke of distant fires, the musk of horses shifting in their sleep, the sour tang of sweat freezing inside your tunic. Each smell feels amplified against the barren cold, reminders that life clings stubbornly even when the world seems dead. Superstitions haunted the guard posts. Some soldiers believed night watch was cursed, that spirits stalked those who lingered too long between sleep and waking. Others insisted it was holy duty, that angels themselves walked beside sentries to guard the camp. To strengthen courage, some men carved crosses into the snow where they stood, believing it turned the spot sacred. You imagine doing the same, tracing a rough symbol with your boot before pacing again. What weighs heaviest is not the cold but the isolation. Inside tents, comrades huddle together, sharing warmth and stories. Outside, you are alone, cut off by the dark. Each minute stretches endlessly, and the temptation to abandon vigilance, to close eyes just for a heartbeat, grows unbearable. You know that to give in might doom the camp, yet your body rebels, craving rest more fiercely than food. And so the hours crawl. You pace, stamp, mutter to yourself, hum snatches of songs. You grip your spear tightly, as though its weight will anchor you awake. Finally, the faintest paling of sky appears, and relief floods your chest. Dawn has come, and with it the chance to collapse onto straw once more. But the irony is cruel. By the time you return to your bedding, the camp is stirring. Fires crackle, horns sound, orders bark. There is no rest for the sentry. Sleep must wait for another night. Exhaustion settles into your bones, dragging at every step of the day's march. And when evening comes again, you know the cycle will repeat. For in war, even in winter, sleep is never only about comfort. It is also about duty, and sometimes duty means sacrificing your own rest so others may keep theirs. The watch ends, dawn comes, and yet another kind of struggle begins the endless trudge of the march. Winter campaigns rarely allowed the luxury of staying still for long. Armies moved from town to town, siege to siege, and soldiers carried their exhaustion on their backs as surely as their packs and weapons. Sleep, when it came, was often stolen in fragments while on the road. You imagine yourself walking with heavy boots through snow, eyelids sagging, fighting the urge to collapse into the whiteness. Chroniclers of the Crusades in the Baltic wrote with pity about men falling asleep as they marched, their heads bobbing like drunken puppets. Some stumbled into ditches or crashed into comrades. A few even collapsed outright, buried by snow until others dragged them upright again. You picture it clearly. A man trudging beside you one moment, gone the next, swallowed by silence until shouts pull him back to his feet. One unusual note comes from a French campaign in Savoy. Soldiers were said to tether themselves together with ropes, not just to prevent stragglers from getting lost in blizzards, but also to keep half-asleep men upright. If one stumbled, the pull of the rope jolted him awake. It turned the march into a grim dance, bodies lurching forward in unsteady rhythm, survival achieved through shared stumbling. Historians remain divided on how often soldiers truly slept while marching. Some suggest such stories are exaggerations, metaphors for exhaustion rather than literal accounts. Others point to modern parallels, soldiers nodding off during forced marches, to argue the phenomenon was entirely real. You know, as you drag your feet now, that exhaustion has a way of claiming the body whether the mind agrees or not. The sensory world of these marches is cruel. Snow blinds you, wind slaps your face raw, and each breath feels like shards of glass scraping your throat. Your boots squelch with icy water, your toes numb to the point where you wonder if they are still there at all. Every muscle burns, yet your mind drifts. You see shapes in the snow trees bending into figures, clouds forming faces. Sleep and waking blur until you cannot tell which world you inhabit. The sounds are monotonous. Crunch, crunch, crunch of boots. Occasionally a muttered curse, the groan of leather straps, the jingle of harness. The rhythm becomes hypnotic, lulling you towards slumber even as you move. Your head nods, jerks up, nods again. You think you hear voices calling your name, but it is only the wind. Superstitions followed these marches too. Some soldiers claimed that falling asleep while walking meant your soul had stepped ahead of your body, and that if you stumbled too far behind, you would die. To counter this, men muttered prayers with each step, tethering spirit to flesh through words. Others believed snow spirits tried to lull men into lying down, whispering promises of warmth. The danger was real. Many who yielded to that temptation never rose again. One curious anecdote from a Swiss soldier tells of men chewing bitter herbs during marches, believing the sharp taste kept them awake. Another speaks of knights forcing squires to sing loudly, the noise preventing drowsiness. You can imagine the bizarre sound of songs slurred by exhaustion, voices cracking in the cold, yet serving as lifelines against collapse. And sometimes, soldiers did surrender to the snow. Chroniclers note grimly how men sat down just for a moment and never stood again. Their comrades marched on, unable to spare the strength to carry them. The white drifts became both blanket and grave, a cruel seduction of rest. You shudder at the thought, telling yourself you will not be one of them, even as your legs beg for it. When finally the march halts, the relief is overwhelming. You drop to the ground, body trembling, eyes already closing before straw or cloak can be arranged. Sleep takes you instantly, as if it has been waiting at your shoulder all along. It may last only minutes before orders sound again, but in those moments, the body drinks as deeply as a man at a well. By morning, or what passes for morning in endless grey, you rise again, more tired than before. Exhaustion has layered upon itself, night after night, march after march. Yet somehow, you continue. Because in winter war, sleep is not a gift. It is something stolen, clawed from the jaws of frost, taken in fragments on roads, in camps, against horses, in snowbanks. You steal it because to stop stealing it is to stop marching, and to stop marching is to die. At last, after so many nights of coughing camps, stolen cloaks, moonlit dreams, and marching exhaustion, you feel the final truth of winter on the front lines. The body is finite, but the mind clings stubbornly to ritual. Each night, however broken, however miserable, you still attempt the act of lying down, closing your eyes, and surrendering to something larger than yourself. Sleep in these brutal winters is less about comfort and more about defiance. Chroniclers of the Northern Crusades summed it up bluntly. They slept not as men, but as beasts who clung to earth until day. And yet in that animal stubbornness lay a kind of victory. To curl on straw, to nestle against a horse, to mutter a prayer, to hum a song, these acts were quiet, rebellions against frost, despair, and death itself. You sense it now, as you press into your bedding. The knowledge that every night survived is itself a triumph. One striking anecdote survives from a Polish knight, who wrote that he dreamed each night of lying in a warm bath, only to wake stiff and aching. But each morning, he added, I rose, for to dream at all meant I was not dead. His words linger with you, a reminder that even the poorest rest held meaning. It proved life still clung. Among historians, there is no final agreement on how soldiers truly endured such winters. Some argue that physical toughness and communal bonds made survival possible. Others insist mortality was staggering, that countless unrecorded deaths haunt the silence of chronicles. Perhaps the truth is both. Men survived more often than seems possible, yet many vanished unnamed into snow. The debates continue, but what is certain is this: you, curled in straw tonight, are part of that long lineage of survival. The sensory picture is familiar now. Straw pricks your skin, wool scratches at your neck, smoke clogs your lungs, the air smells of horses, sweat, and damp. And yet, amid these discomforts, your body finds a rhythm. Breathing slows, limbs loosen. The cold remains, but it becomes background instead of tyrant. Sleep tiptoes in, not as luxury, but as reluctant ally. Superstitions mark even this final surrender. Some soldiers cross themselves 3 times, muttering that the third is strongest. Others spit into the fire before lying down, a gesture to drive away demons. A few clutch charms, beads, bones, bits of cloth, believing they anchor the soul so it will not wander too far in dreams. You imagine yourself clutching one now, not because you believe, but because belief is another form of warmth. One unusual account from an English archer notes that he would lie flat on his back, eyes open to the stars, refusing to close them until exhaustion forced him. He believed watching the sky made sleep gentler, as though heaven itself guarded him. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps it was only another trick of a desperate mind. But you can picture the stars wheeling above, cold and eternal, as men below curl and fade into dreams. And so, night after night, sleep on the front lines is not one thing. It is stolen warmth, shared bodies, whispered names, bitter herbs, sour ale, horse breath, ghost stories, silver moons. It is coughing lungs and frozen toes, laughter forced against despair, and rituals performed in half-belief. It is ugly, fragile, beautiful in its persistence. Tonight, as you curl under your cloak, you realize what it has always meant. To sleep in winter war is to declare, softly but firmly, I am still here. You close your eyes, straw crackling, lice biting, frost creeping, but life remains. The body surrenders, the mind drifts, and dawn waits beyond the horizon. Now, as the final section fades, let your breathing slow with the rhythm of this ending. The long march of history has carried you across frozen fields, into smoky tents, through coughing nights and moonlit dreams. You have lain beside horses, beneath cloaks, upon moss, reeds, and snow. You have felt the weight of armor and the tug of longing for home. Yet through every hardship, the story has unfolded gently, reminding you not of despair but of endurance. Allow yourself, in this moment, to step away from the battlefield. Picture the camp dissolving, snow melting into silence, and the voices of weary soldiers fading like distant echoes. What remains is not cold or hunger, but the resilience of the human spirit, the stubborn heartbeat that carries through the darkest winters. The air around you softens now. The smells of smoke and wool drift away, replaced by nothing at all, a clean stillness. The sounds of coughing and clinking steel vanish into quiet. All that lingers is a hush, a calm expanse where you are no longer pressed by frost or fear. Let your eyelids grow heavier. Imagine straw beneath you turning into something softer: pillows, blankets, a warm bed that holds you without scratching. Feel your muscles loosen, your breathing deepen, your body sinking lower, lower, lower. History has told its story. The soldiers have closed their eyes, and you too may rest, knowing you are safe, knowing the night holds no battles for you. Sleep now, gently, calmly, as the world around you fades to a peaceful whisper. Sweet dreams.